Okay, Mr. Vash, I'm gonna meet you.
No.
Okay, so I don't know if you've ever seen one of our AMAs before, but it's pretty simple. Um, there is an AMA question channel, and then an AMA discussion channel. So everybody's going to be muted. I'm going to be picking out the questions from the AMA questions channel. And sometimes, if we trust them, I'll unmute them so they can talk to you directly. But most of the questions will be just read out by me because there are a ton of questions to go through.
I'm ready. Oh wait, they can't hear me.
Keyboard? No, they can hear you. They're all in here listening. Some of them are really upset that I've got to call me on the server.
Hey.
So be prepared.
Didn't you know I'm actually an anarchist? Get it right next time.
Okay. So first off, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. I feel like we've had a long line of reactionary fashy types come on lately. So it's good to get someone from the other side of the aisle, if there's an aisle. Do you want to just kind of break down what you believe, tell them about yourself?
Yeah. So, so obviously Vosh, far left streamer, YouTuber. Currently, by the way, very ill. If that affects my behavior or if I have to pause to blow my nose or anything, don't take it personally. But, in regards to my politics, I feel like, generally speaking, people want the same basic things. People want to live freely. They want to be happy. They want to be well fed, to have freedom of choice, have opportunities in life. Fundamentally, I think we are all sort of aligned in our goals in a sort of shared respect of the liberal values, freedom, fraternity, brotherhood. And I respect that. I think, however, that many of the political systems that we currently advocate for push...
Alavic.
I think one of our mods is Hama. Sorry about that. Go on.
Oh, no worries. I feel that a lot of the political systems we push for today do not do a very good job of living up to the spirit of those principles. So I like to introduce alternative arguments. Obviously, I'm not the only leftist online, but I feel a lot of other leftists approach this from a different perspective than I do. I try to approach this, my agenda, my politics, from the perspective that I would have wanted to see it presented when I was 15, 16, just getting into politics, not really aware of what I was doing, not fully educated on the particulars of different political ideologies, but passionately interested in the betterment of the world. That's what I try to do.
Okay. So I think that's a pretty good parameter to start out with. First question is going to be, I'm just going to jump right into it. From pro-choice is pro-murder. What is your basic position on abortion?
I don't assign personhood to fetuses. I think that personhood, not humanity, obviously fetuses are human, it'd be idiotic to argue against that, but in terms of personhood, whether or not they're deserving of the rights of a person, I believe that these things, this is an emergent characteristic that comes from engagement with one's environment. So while brain signals and heartbeat may take place in the womb, I would make the argument that these things, while necessary for making one a human, do not make one a person, does not make one befitting of the same legal and moral rights that I, as a fully developed human being, deserve. But I have respect, by the way, for the anti-choice, for the pro-life position. A lot of people think that it's completely rooted in misogyny, and while there is a lot of that, I don't believe that. I think it is a stable philosophical position to take, even if I disagree with it.
Okay, cool. Mr. Pro-choice is pro-murder. If you wanna rebut that or follow up on that, just post another question. Maybe add VC to the end of it, guys. If you want to speak to him directly, and if you're not a troll, I'll unmute you. You can talk to him for a bit, okay? Next question is from it's some Arabic thing. Hello, thoughts on Hezbollah and the recent conflict between Lebanon and Israel?
I'm going to be revealing my ignorance here. I have to be super careful when I talk about foreign policy and about the rest of the world because I'm an Amerifat and I know my limitations as a human being. Unfortunately, at this moment, I can't give my opinions on this. I'm going to say some dumb fuck shit if I do. I need to read up more.
Okay, that was way too humble an answer. Next time you should probably just dive in head first,
You're right. Oh wait, I don't like Israel. There you go. There's my hot take. Okay, there we go. Now we know.
Okay, now we got it. Next question from Eczema. How can workers make educated decisions about how companies run if those same workers are not educated enough to become managers under a meritocratic capitalist system?
Okay, so there's a lot of presuppositions here. For one, the idea that we live in a meritocratic system is fucking laughable. I assume we're good to swear here, right? I can't imagine we're not.
Go.
Yeah. So no, if you've ever worked any job in your life, like literally any job in your life, you know perfectly well that there is not a meritocracy when it comes to how people are promoted from within a workplace. There's a whole bunch of politics and external considerations that go into it. And like the idea that this is a meritocratic process is like hilariously desynchronous with reality. But in regards to how we can expect workers to make more educated decisions in sort of a cooperative ownership respect, this is sort of the part and parcel game that we see under late stage capitalism. One of the premier sort of ideas of liberalism, of original capitalism, was that everyone be educated. There be free education. Not only does this provide a benefit to the economy because it increases the total productivity of a laborer, it also means that people are more engaged with democracy and capable of standing up for their own rights in a democratic space. Unfortunately, the concept of public education has come under attack over the past 100 years. This is one of the ways in which we have failed to live up to the expectations of liberalism. Now we have kids who have difficulty going to school because of truancy programs that are exploitative or exclusionary. We have school lunch debts that make it like so kids rack up debts just trying to like eat enough to survive when going to school because their parents can't afford to feed them. We're having a big argument now about the accessibility of higher education, the price of which is only going up due to an increase in bureaucracy sort of surrounding the top rather than an actual increase in the cost of education, at least for the most part. And it is through that attack on our education that people have become, at least in my opinion, proportionally less capable of engaging with their environment. I would see a simultaneous front not only to increase the degree to which the average citizen is educated, but also to make that education more practical. We spend most of our lives in the workplace. Why not train people how to engage with that space in a way that is healthy and ethical and sort of conducive to self-improvement, to changing the system for the better? That's what I want to see. That's like a pre-proletarian revolution step. Not to mention, by the way, collective ownership doesn't mean everybody has to be a manager. It just means everyone's collectively an owner. But yeah, no, there's a lot of interplay there between how we treat education and how we treat workplace, quote unquote, meritocracy.
Okay. So just FYI, guys, I'm not going to be doing any pushback on by myself because his voice makes my penis feel. So if you'd like to challenge one of these things, you need to ask them yourself. Okay.
I do debates on my channel all the time.
Yeah, I think they're afraid of you, to be honest. Like I'm getting very few like voice chat requests. I've got one here, Rassen. Rassen, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Just scroll down here. Go for it, Rassen.
It is okay, my friend. I can unmute myself.
Okay. Go for it. So
hello, let me get it up here. My question to you, Mr. Fash, was what are your thoughts on Eurasianism? Actually, it's 3 questions. What are your thoughts on Eurasianism? Do you support the current Eurasian mission, that is the Eurasian Economic Union, the strengthening of relations between Russia and China and the post-Soviet state? And also, what are your thoughts on the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin?
Okay, first of all, how do you define Eurasianism?
Eurasianism is it's the geographical concept of Eurasia as a civilizational identity. It is the same way how liberals in particular, would define the West as Eurasia as just its own civilizational identity based on the land power.
I'm not typically in favor of the idea that people should be allied with one another based particularly on their geography. While I do advocate for internationalism as a concept, I don't do so because I feel as though people in particular demographic or geographic regions have some predisposition towards working better with one another on an intrinsic level. I do it because I want to promote freedom and unity amongst people all over the world. Forming identities or forming solidarity amongst geographic lines, at least in my experience, my understanding of history, has a tendency to lead to bad outcomes. I'm reminded of Japan's what was it, Pan-Asian Global Prosperity Sphere, or which was of course just an imperialist fascist game, where they were conquering nations in their area under the guise of freeing them from Western imperialism. Not that anyone really believed it, but it made for good propaganda.
But this is not. It's going to be inevitable that people will form interest based on their geography. For example, people will form allies based on mutual interest because of their geography. For example, Germany is known as the historical land power of Europe, but Germany is within NATO. It's within the European Union. It is a quote-unquote Western country. However, it still maintains a unique relationship with Russia, despite the sort of scoldings that Germany would get from Britain and America. This is because Germany, not only is because of its economic land power tradition, but also the fact that they rely on things like Russian resources to fuel its economy. Well, at the same time, Russia would rely on German professionals or experts to fuel their economy as well. I don't see how there's an issue with people forming identities based on the mutual interest that will come from their geography.
Yeah, I just don't think that, like, a German citizen wakes up one day and thinks, yes, it is now time for me to form an alliance with the Russians because of my history as a strategic land power and the resources I share. I don't. Why?
Not about the individual. This is very liberal. This is not about the individual. It's about the nation state. It is about the society and the civilization.
I don't. If you're, I don't even understand these questions. If you're talking about the nation state's goal, Germany is far more closely allied with the Western European powers than it ever would be. Well, hold on. What you're talking about right now, at least to me, is the myth of nations, the myth of civilizations. People, I care about people. And a worker in Germany has far more in common with a worker in China than either a Chinese worker or a German worker have in common with the bourgeoisie in their respective nations. I don't believe in this, like, people's national or civilizational character leads to certain tendencies amidst alliances. These things are true historically, but usually because they're pushed by imperial powers, not because people form alliances along those lines for their own interests. I'm interested in building a world where people don't feel tied to their geography, because at the end of the day, there's no real benefit to aligning yourself along those lines. If you want to form sort of a personal kinship with a certain area of the world, you're free to do that, but there shouldn't be an obligation to. There shouldn't be an inherent correlation between these things.
Like, people en masse without any sort of, just en masse as blank slate individuals do this. It's the fact that nation states, nations, kingdoms, domains, etc., civilizations, they're all formed based on the sovereign. The individual, I'll first say that I reject the liberal, the Rousseauian idea of the
These are like
individual,
Nazbol talking points. I think we come from very fundamentally different, like, moral and political frameworks. I don't even know what meaningful problems are being addressed through these questions. When I think of, like, how to improve the world, I think about education rates or healthcare or economic equality or the preponderance of war and disease. I don't know what this, like, the national and civilizational character. I have no idea what this means or what problems these are meant to address.
Because these are actual geopolitical interests of actual countries with actual people in them that have actual interests.
And?
It is within these countries' interests to push for their own geopolitical strategies and their goals. Otherwise, they will wane otherwise their geopolitical interests and influence will wane, and they'll essentially become the let's say, the second fiddle to some other geopolitical power, which would not be good for the economies of these other countries. It's about power and interest when it comes to geopolitics.
Okay, but why should I personally be interested in the maneuverings of nation states trying to maintain economic and military supremacy amongst one another? I want to destroy the nation state. I'm an anarchist. I want people to be the predominant unit of society, not nation states or civilizations. Let the civilizations, nation states, whatever, let them play their games. I certainly have no influence over them, but I'm not going to champion that ideology or that framework by supposing that there's some inherent civilizational or like archaity which lends people towards alliances beyond the most superficial like geopolitical maneuvering. I just don't believe in that. I don't subscribe to that.
I guess we'll agree to disagree, but I'll just like to end that making a dialectic between the nation and the people I don't think is very accurate or viable. The nation is the people. The people are the nation.
These are Nazbol talking points. No, the nation is not the people. The nation is a loose unity of people with a great trio of power who keep placated the people within their borders through like the guise of nationalism. And people like you have like fallen hook, line, and sinker. I have more in common with the workers of any other nation than I ever could with the bourgeoisie in my country. I reject the myth of nation states as the unifying force of humanity. Nation states as a concept are like 200 years old. Why would I believe that these are like the units by which we should measure societal worth?
Because these are the geopolitical realities, whether we want to like agree with them or not.
No, this is a non sequitur. Saying that nation states exist, which they do, and that people play geopolitical power games, which they do, has nothing to do with like verifying or considering these to be like the default characteristics of humanity that are meant to be sort of championed above others, and to believe, by the way, that nation states are made with the with like the will of the people. Like these are the complete non sequiturs. To say nation states exist has nothing to do with the moral claims that you're making.
I'm not making any moral claims. I'm just pointing out geopolitical realities, which, by the way, I do not see how anarchism could fix these geopolitical realities, especially if you're trying to dissolve this. You
were making moral claims, my dude. You weren't just saying that geopolitical conflicts exist. No one would disagree with that. You were saying that like solidarity between the state and the people, like no, you were throwing moral claims in there. No one would disagree that these geopolitical like sort of power grabs take place. I would argue that these are a product of a fundamentally broken power system that we can undermine by elevating the individual, by elevating the worker, and by elevating internationalism.
So this is a geopolitical interest for you then? Fine.
I think you're gonna have to agree to disagree.
Nation states are dumb and gay. That's my closing statement.
Okay.
No, you.
Okay. I think that's a perfect way to wrap that one up. Next person we've got is Juice the Orange, or Mr. Juice, select this. Juice, you can unmute yourself.
All right. Go. I just wanted to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about Islam and how it impacts Europe?
I mean, I don't like organized religion at all. I don't like organized religion of any kind. Islam falls within that. And I'm not going to play this like dumb fuck liberal game like, oh, religion isn't an issue. It's just unifying the heart. No, none of that bullshit. Forgive me. With that said, I really don't believe that Islam is inherently any more dangerous or any more destructive than any other major organized religion. Like Christianity right now, it's through Christian dogma that America has like failed to intervene appropriately in climate change, for example. There's a huge like fucking boomer evangelical movement to deny the possibility of human-made climate change because God gave us this earth, and why would he give us like it is to do with what we will. How could we destroy it? It is God's creation. So like that's probably just by numbers far more destructive than anything Islam could do. At the end of the day, the problems that we see with Islam in Europe right now seem to be a product mostly of socioeconomics, of refugee status, of long-held geopolitical tensions, of bigotry, discrimination, of apartheid, ghettos, and segregation, and of differing cultures. All of these things are very serious problems that should be taken seriously. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think that there's any room in that discussion for the suggestion that Islam or Muslims are just like this inherently dangerous group of people, or that they need another reformation before they're capable of, living toe to toe with us civilized Western Europeans.
So you don't think it's a threat to Western civilization?
I don't think there is a such thing as Western civilization. That's like a class of civilizations myth that I've never really bought into. It's also a way of framing fascist propaganda. The idea that the West is standing strong against a tide of brown hordes that are trying to destroy our way of life. It's nonsense. No, Western civilization is fine. I do think that any large demographic shift, migrant crisis is going to be a problem. I just don't think it has anything to do with Islam inherently. And I would like to see socioeconomic solutions being thrown at the way of these problems rather than just this vague fear-mongering about Islam not being compatible with Western civilization.
Oh, that seems fair.
Okay.
I love Muslims. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Next question is from Brother Sentodes. How will the military function in your ideal society?
It should be noted that while I am an anarchist, whenever I am talking, I advocate for a market socialist position because I'm of the opinion that we need to have a transitionary state out of capitalism before we can make any meaningful strides towards a post-socialist society. The people who want to revolt and go straight from like capitalism to communism, I think that's very dumb. Marx didn't suggest that. Lenin didn't suggest that. There's supposed to be a transitory period of socialism, and during that period, a state needs to exist. Socialism, does not necessarily entail the destruction of a state, at least not as I advocate for it. So after that transitionary period, when we are in that market socialist society, I imagine that the military would function more or less the same way that it does today, though hopefully we would sort of rein in our military budget and take more of a defensive role across the world than an offensive one. It would be nice, of course, if the socialist revolution would take place in conjunction with revolutions in other countries, so rather than us battling off like a horde of capitalist imperialist, excursions, we could sort of rest easy on the knowledge that the rest of the world isn't trying to destroy us. But I imagine that this transitionary state is at least a century away. I'm not very optimistic about the prospect of an immediate, like an immediate system in the midway, or the immediacy with which it needs to be brought about. Past the transitory socialist state, I genuinely have no idea. I want to do more research on that subject of anarcho-syndicalism, but hopefully once we've reached that point in society, there will no longer be any state threats that it will be necessary to cultivate a massive military against.
Okay. Actually, I think Mr. Brother wants to be unmuted for this one, so go ahead and respond.
Yeah, I think that was a pretty great answer, actually.
I love you too.
Although the last point was a little disappointing in my personal opinion. I keep asking anarchists how exactly would they deal with a military threat, whether that be a foreign state force or a domestic rebellion of some kind or something along those lines. And the answer is,
I can say this. To give a less wishy-washy answer, the best guess that I can give is an anarcho-syndicalist society essentially is syndicates are basically super unions. I mean, if you want to get really reductive about it. And I imagine that fundamentally a military in an anarcho-syndicalist society would function essentially as a syndicate. It would be another workers' board, but rather than power tools or service work, it would be military work. And that syndicate would probably have some sort of broad geopolitically relevant sort of international council that it would be able to pull from smaller councils all across the world in various districts or regions or segments or however they decide to partition their territories. And from that point, they would be able to sort of muster up a people's militia of some kind. Hopefully, it would take place within the same fundamental framework that workers' liberation would sort of see under anarcho-syndicalism, because otherwise we would have to fall back on like pseudo-state apparatuses, which I obviously would not support. That's the best like non-wishy-washy answer that I can give, I think.
I think the answer is, in my personal opinion, a little bad in the sense that this kind of just sounds like a weird form of just paramilitarism, where you allow different paramilitary organizations to exist that all hopefully will work together and have same ideals in mind, and that the leader councils of these paramilitary organizations won't immediately just decide, well, you know what, I have more guns than everybody else. Let's all work together and maybe create our own area or something like that. This system would need to have some sort of massive structures of checks and balances of some kind, but even then, it might just hinder the military more and more. The more I think about this,
that's more of a fundamental criticism of anarchism. The idea that without a centralized state apparatus, there's no way to prevent individual territories but forming their own like secluded communes. And there are arguments against that. The idea is that in an anarcho-syndicalist society, there's a degree of interwoven economic unity that disincentivizes sort of the splitting off or the fracturing of different groups. Also, hopefully, the way in which society would be organized would make it such that there aren't really any power structures that you can meaningfully co-opt as a strongman. But I should say these are very high level theoretical, like pro-anarchy arguments that I personally feel I need to engage in more reading before I can like meaningfully defend. But those are perfectly cogent questions.
Okay.
Shit stuff. I hate reading, so that's my handicap.
Warhammer 40k boys, Night Lords forever.
I was an Imperial Guard. I was the proletariat back then too.
Okay. Next question is from Comrade Pingu.
Hey.
Can you explain why anarchism always fails, and why all existing socialist nations have always been, to use your words,
to use my words?
To use your words, tankies.
Okay. I have never said. Okay, so this is coming from a tanky. I have never said all existing socialist nations are tanky. The reason this person is saying that is because they are dishonestly ascribing my position on tankies to refer to all MLs, which I do not. I have respect for Marxist-Leninist movements across the world, and Marxist-Leninist states. So, no. All successful socialist states have not been tanky. As for why all anarchist societies fail, there are a number of structural reasons why anarchism, in an immediate non-transitory sense, might not be as capable of defending itself against external aggression than an ML vanguard state. These are very complicated, like anarchy versus communism arguments, but thankfully, I'm not an anti-communist. I'm fine with Marxist-Leninists. All I ask is that if a vanguard party attempts to seize control of a state, they do so in collaboration with a class-conscious workers' revolution, rather than them simply seizing the bourgeois apparatus of power and then sort of instilling a top-down, quote-unquote, proletarian state that doesn't so much represent the issues of the proletarians as it does themselves. This question was pretty dishonestly framed. But yeah, no, I don't have a problem with MLs. And also, there probably are ways in which anarchist revolutions could be more successful in the future. I do think that a transitory period where you sort of utilize state power to defend yourself against counter-revolutionaries is important.
Okay. Next question is from Franz. Was the USSR good, and was it better than the US? And if so, how so?
The USSR was, as all massively powerful states are, a mixed bag. I would say the same about basically any massive state. I would say the same about the United States of America. Anyone who says the United States of America has been a wholly negative force of destruction is, I think, being a little bit reductive. At the end of the day, any big nation state is going to contain a lot of very smart, very powerful people, some of whom, at least just stochastically, are going to do some good for the world. The USSR was another one of these cases. They had a phenomenal economic resurgence from their sort of feudal period to their elevation to world superpower, and what's more, they advanced workers' rights and egalitarianism amidst workers in ways that were not present in America. I'm reminded of a story by which one of the driving forces that led to the civil rights movement being successful in the United States of America was when a delegate from the USSR was, I could be misremembering, but I think I have the points here. When a delegate was sent from the USSR to America, and they were a black man, and they were treated quite poorly at the airport in America on account of their skin color, and it was something of an international embarrassment that a representative of the USSR, a dignitary of the state, would be treated so poorly for their skin color. And that embarrassment, the pressure from the Soviet Union's comparatively higher level of racial integration, was one of the factors that led to the success of the civil rights movement here. A lot of people don't talk about that. That said, I'm sorry, I don't like authoritarian states. I'm sorry, you're not going to get me on that. The USSR was not a state of the workers. It just fucking wasn't. Anyone who says it was is lying to themselves. Stalin was absolutely a tyrant. He absolutely seized power and killed dissidents. He absolutely did pretty heinous fucking things in power. And the USSR gave, by absolutely no measure, any more democratic power to the average worker than America did. In fact, America probably had a greater level of democracy within its workplaces, if for no other reason than because you could be lucky and get promoted, whereas the only way to have any meaningful control over the distribution of resources as a worker from the USSR was to be elevated into a member of the Communist Party, which is an entirely separate class interest. They got treated differently with different priorities. I am perfectly fine celebrating the good of the USSR, but there are a lot of people uncomfortable criticizing the bad, which is unfortunate because whether we like it or not, the USSR has left a bad taste in the mouths of many, many Westerners who might otherwise be keen to socialism as we approach the end years of late-stage capitalism. I would be interested in advocating for socialism in a way that does not dredge up the failed experiments of the past.
Okay. Next question is from Actual Communist Boy. What books or media most strongly convince you of anarchism? What books or media would you recommend most strongly to other anarchists?
I'm terribly sorry, but I really I don't engage in reading that often. My chat's mad at me right now for saying the USSR wasn't democratic for workers. Come on, guy. Get over yourself. I'm sorry, I don't read very often. The person who got me mostly into anarchism and anti-authoritarianism as a sort of prescriptive moral judgment was Noam Chomsky. I've read some excerpts of like Manufacturing Consent, for example, back in the days when I had more free time and read a little bit more frequently. But beyond that, I'm afraid I just don't engage with media that much.
Okay. Next question from Train. What are your thoughts on the universal basic income? Do you believe that it is anti-communist like many communists?
A lot of what people talk about when they refer to universal basic income has sort of been tainted by Yang. I'm very much not a member of the Yang gang, unfortunately. The concept of a UBI isn't in and of itself bad. If you live in a state that has money, which, you know, not necessarily going to be the case forever, but as long as we live in a state that has money available to us, it makes sense that some people should be provided a base stipend that exceeds or sort of goes past the rewards they would get for their labor. Now, whether this takes the form of UBI payments or takes the form of a guaranteed baseline of like state-provided sustenance that wouldn't cost anything, like, for example, getting food credits or getting free housing or free medical care, that's, I think, sort of parsing the question a little bit, because in practical terms, both of these things are UBI. I'm more in favor of the latter, though. I prefer the idea of the state being able to provide a baseline level of sustenance in a non-monetary way, because I think this leads, in the long run, to a better sort of stratification of economic incentivization. There are a lot of ways, a lot of circumstances in which just providing money to the poor and the disadvantaged does not meaningfully improve the quality of their life. It doesn't meaningfully affect the material circumstances of their deprivation. Whereas providing them a base stipend, food, housing, medical care, education, these things can ensure a baseline exigent of your income that you can then build upon, turning money into more of a luxury commodity you use to better your life than a base sustenant need that you use to prolong your life. I do not think money should be necessary to prolong one's life. Okay.
Next question is going to be from Mr. Outsider. Mr. Outsider, you are unmuted.
Amazing.
Mr. Outsider,
Amazing.
you're outside. You gone? I think he's gone. Okay, Mr.
Wait, can
Outsider.
you hear me now? Now?
There you
There we go.
Okay.
There we go.
go.
Let me just read because I forgot what I wrote specifically. Are you a person that's in favor of limiting a person's ability to speak if they speak on certain subjects that are distasteful or lead to violence?
No, I'm very, very, very much in favor of free speech. I mean, I would be condemned by any rules.
I know that's like the position, like you have to be out publicly, but do you ever advocate for anybody to be removed from any public platform?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those two things aren't in any way, shape, or form contrary opinions. I believe the state.
Which person specifically, and why would you have them removed?
There are quite a few people I would push to have removed, but I wouldn't have them removed by advocating for an implementation of state power. I would advocate to have them removed
I'm not
by
asking
protesting.
about state power. I'm asking removal from public platforms. Who and why?
Is this flamenco?
Who?
Is this flamenco?
No.
It actually does sound like flamenco.
It does sound like flamenco, doesn't it?
One of those voices, I guess.
Yeah, maybe it is, huh? And flamenco
So
was
do you
in
have
here
the answer, or are you
earlier.
going to choose changing the topic?
All right, you're right. I shouldn't dodge you, flamenco. I'm happy to finally have an opportunity to speak to you. Yeah, okay. So I'm very pro free speech. However, part of free speech is the ability to protest against people who are saying things that you don't like. Utilizing that social power is one of the very, very few ways in which the average person can make their opinions known. If you're asking me to give a list of everyone that I would want thrown off social media or thrown out of political relevance, I could give you a list of basically every conservative, reactionary, and Nazi
And
that
why?
is currently.
Why would you do that?
Because they're enemies of my political interests. They do the same thing to me. Why would I not do the same to them?
So you would have them removed because you simply don't like them.
Yeah,
You think
in the
that's a valid
same
reason
way
for-
that we arrest murderers because we don't like them. Yes.
No, we
so-
arrest murderers
so to
because
be-
murderers
Mhm.
limit the ability for the state to function. It's in the public interest that we take away people that commit murder. So let's try to
what does the
stay on
public
topic
what does
here.
the public interest have to do with the state being able to function? The state functions fine with murder.
Because the state would not be able to function if we did not punish murderers.
Whoa! This is highly reductive, and you're showing your
No,
pedigree,
this is very
Flamenco.
basic
So,
logic.
so here, the drug war that has been implemented by the U.S.
I'm not
government
talking about
has
drug
led
war,
to.
I'm talking about
Hold on. Listen, I
No,
understand.
no, you
I
don't
understand that
get this-
nailing in on a very,
Hey,
very,
hey,
very
buddy,
specific
hey,
question
buddy,
and not
buddy,
allowing
buddy.
for discussion. Listen, Flamenco, I know you've been in my DMs for months and you're desperate to finally talk to me. You literally have like 40 unread, unanswered messages like sitting in my inbox. I get it. I know you're excited, but let me answer because you said some dumbass shit and I'm happy to correct you. So, the drug war, which is propped up by the United States government, has led to a massive increase in the amount of gun crime in this country because it leads to economic incentives which prioritize, gangs fighting over one another for territory, control of drug resources. This is murder, and it is murder which is being propped up by state policy. However, these people murdering each other, while illegal, also serve the interest of the state because it perpetuates the existence of an economic and racial underclass. So the statement, the state doesn't want people to murder because it inhibits the function of the state, is highly reductive. Now, to get back to your point, the very, very, very loaded question that you asked, in regards to wanting people removed from social media or whatever, I think that to characterize my argument as wanting them removed because I don't like them is a little bit reductive. I mean, I've seen you in the Kiwi Farms threads, like participating in people doxing me. So the argument, like for you to unironically complain that I'm like being shifty and throwing people off because I don't like them because you're salty as fuck, I won't respond to you on Discord and are taking it out on me in Kiwi Farms is fucking hysterical. At the end of the day, people utilize social power to deplatform others all the time. This has been happening for thousands of years. To suddenly like turn your cheek and go, oh, I can't believe you're doing this now. Aren't you in favor of free speech? Is fucking pathetic. So like, get off the high horse, buddy. Everyone knows you're being disingenuous when you do that. Absolutely nobody buys it. Everyone has been using social power to deplatform others. It has been happening since the beginning of human civilization.
Okay. I think that's that put a nail in the coffin there. Next one is gonna be from let's go with Timsbury. Do you have any examples of leftism not devolving into an authoritarian?
I apologize. Into an authoritarian state?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I could make the argument for like the Zapatistas or Rojava or like Catalonian Spain or whatever, but these tend to be anarchist systems. The problem, I think, is that the material conditions that surround a proletarian revolution tend to lend themselves towards a need for authoritarianism to defend yourself against counter-revolutions. Like, if you think back about essentially every socialist revolution that's ever happened, this is usually about maybe 6 months before the United States comes knocking, or sometimes the United States comes knocking even beforehand. The ability for a socialist state to defend itself against foreign imperialism is pretty closely tied to its ability to enact sort of authoritarian state power. Look, for example, what America is doing right now in Venezuela. So Venezuela is by no means a perfect socialist state. I'm not going to defend it on all of its points, blah, blah, blah. But the United States, by exerting embargoes and soft political power, has propped up the very massive quotation marks constitutional seizure of power by Guido, who's just some dumb fuck from their council who doesn't have any legal or constitutional right to the presidency, but we say so because we think that he would be more beneficial to American business interests than Maduro is. And Maduro's ability to resist that kind of foreign imposition, along with the arms that we traffic into the country, along with the embargoes that we put on the country, his ability to sort of crack down on this, his ability to resist this imperialism, is pretty heavily tied to his ability to engage in authoritarian, state control. I despise authoritarianism. I really, really don't like it. I like elevating the individual. I like elevating freedom. I'm very, very much in favor of these things. That is why when I want to see a socialist revolution, I want it to be, if not truly international, then at least it taking part in correspondence with many others, such that there is enough broad socialist power across the world that counter-revolutionary imperialism would not be so tightly focused, such as to need a strong man like Stalin or whatever to resist that kind of counter-attention. You know what I mean?
Actually, Tim Spray, do you know what it means?
I'm sorry?
Am I unmuted?
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You understand. So in a vacuum, you're saying that you would, without, I don't know, the United States, you would be against an authoritarian system?
The United States, I'm against it in principle no matter what. The elimination of the United States like soft imperial power would make it much more likely that a socialist revolution could succeed without going authoritarian to defend itself from counter-revolutionaries. I'm not so naive as to believe that if America revolted, there would be no pushback from the rest of the world, which is why I think that as climate change sort of takes hold and the world gets progressively, to be frank, worse, and material conditions begin to divide further and further, I think the likelihood of imperial resources being divided to the extent that a broad international workers' base could revolt grows more likely, and therefore the strength of any sort of follow-up counter-revolution would be proportionally weakened. And in that process, we might be able to avoid the authoritarianism that has, I think, plagued the legacy of socialism over the past century.
Okay. I don't agree with you on most of this stuff. I just want to clarify just for this final point. So you're saying without the international order that exists at the moment, the possibility for a leftist society would exist. So the only thing stopping this at the moment is other international players.
Yeah, well, they are definitely the most dangerous actors when it comes to counter-revolution. I mean, think of all the assassination attempts we had on Castro, Think of how many times we tried to fuck with Cuba, our next-door neighbor, over the past 50, 60 years, We're definitely the worst actors. But even with America down, even with the big imperialist powers down, there would still be threats. Just hopefully not enough to necessitate authoritarianism. And I want to clarify, by the way, I really do. a lot of people, when they think of like lefties advocating for their policies, they think of like LARPers or people who have some utopian vision. I would like to believe, or at least I try to escape that perception, because normally when I advocate for the implementation of certain political agendas or ideologies or whatever, when I do these things, I try to do it from within the framework of the comfortable liberal. I try to do it in a way that reassures people. Like, I really do want life to be good and comfy. I don't want fucking workers' quotas. I don't want people being relocated to different provinces so they can go work there. I don't want people to die in some bloody revolution in a futile attempt to like revoke American imperialism. I don't want these things, because those things are bloody and useless. I want a better world. And there's a lot of discourse that can be had as to how to achieve that better world, but a fundamental assumption of good faith and shared intent is very, very, very important for achieving that goal.
Okay. And just my last thing, just to let other people go. Because you clarified that the major thing against the of a leftist kind of nation kind of forming is international players. Do you not think that human nature and the desire for power would at all bring the end of an anarcho state, which is seemingly what you're advocating for, or your ideal situation?
You mean in regards to foreign imperialism, or in regards to the internal mechanisms of that state?
Internal mechanisms, more like if there is no international players getting involved in this, say, ideal state, do you not think that human nature would get involved and make it an authoritarian state as opposed to a more anarcho state?
I am in favor of the idea, and this is backed up pretty heavily, that people and people's nature are largely a product of their environment. Over the past few thousand years, we have seen a great many civilizations with a great many different tendencies and predilections towards certain modes of behavior, towards certain political, economic, social systems. I believe that people are largely a product of their conditions that which they were born in. The vast majority of the people who live in this country are, in my mind, generally speaking, altruistic. It is the system in which we live that prohibits or disincentivizes altruism. Every moment you spend on someone else, every dollar you spend on someone else, is an investment that you will never see a return on. And it is because the way in which we dedicate time and resources to one another is the same way that we ensure our own survivability. This disincentivizes altruism as a concept. I think if we distance people from the base sustenance needs that drives people towards greediness, that's when I think greediness is valid, if you're going to starve and need a loaf of bread. If you distance yourself from this system, I think you will find that people are far more open, far more willing to engage with economic systems that do not take as a presupposition their willingness to do harm unto others for personal gain. I do believe that. And while I don't have sources in front of me right now, I could, I think, make a convincing data-based argument for this.
Okay, thanks. All right.
Okay, cool. Next question is going to be from... let me mute Mr. Timber. Next question is from Discord. Discord. How does a communist state redistribute that which can't be equally shared, like rare goods, one car among 1,000 people, virtue, work ethic, etc.?
How does one redistribute a luxury good amidst a large population?
Basically.
I don't advocate for central planning. I advocate for market forces, more or less deciding the distribution of luxury goods in a society. I wouldn't trust a state actor to, like, oh, here's one fancy car, who does it go to? I would trust market forces to this. While there are decent arguments for central planning that I have read, I would want to engage far more with them before I felt comfortable implementing them into some sort of a broader mixed economy prescription of what my ideal society would look like. But in terms of how the distribution of luxury goods would take place under my ideal system, I mean, be pretty comparable to how they take place now. The difference is, rather than what you get being tied to your success within a capitalist system, it would probably be tied to your willingness to collaborate with the economic superstructures that exist within an anarcho-syndicalist system. I imagine there would be some sort of incentivization for broader success. But again, we're talking like hard anarchist theory here that I would need to read up more on before I felt comfortable making any like prescriptive statements.
Next one is going to be, let's go with Mo. You can unmute yourself whenever you want.
Hello, how's it going?
And actually,
Howdy.
I need to. I'm gonna grab some water. So I'll be right back with Mo.
All right, thank you.
Hit me up.
So, what do you think about firearms, in America? And do you think it's reasonable to say that mental health is an issue rather than the force multiplier itself?
I'm very pro Second Amendment. I'm very, very pro Second Amendment. Mostly for the purposes of a workers' revolution, but I don't believe in the myth that our gun problems stem from like the ease with which people can purchase firearms. If we want to address gun issues in this country, we need to end the drug war, meaningfully address intergenerational poverty, and yes, mental health would probably also be good. Not just, by the way, for the gun crimes, but also because it's good to promote, mental well-being midst people in a state. But this, I feel that people who advocate for like stricter gun control are sort of misattributing the extent to which the availability of firearms plays into the exertion of violence in this country. In my mind, mental illness is as much of a problem as the way in which our culture treats guns. I think that our culture treats guns in a very masochistic, machismo way. We treat guns as this sort of masculine signifier of power. If you take a look at a gun magazine, see how those things are sold to you, see how those things are advertised, I think that pretty well substantiates my point. As long as we treat guns as a symbol of masculinity, as a tool of power, rather than some piece of equipment that you use for sport and for hunting or whatever, we're going to see problems here with how guns are used, with how guns are treated.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I can add on to that. That there's this big, if you don't mind.
No, go. Hit it up.
There's this big number of like 40,000 that they use in the United States, right? Like of how many people die. There's 40,000 homicides a year in America due to firearms, right? But they don't take into account that even like 29,000 of those are actually suicides, right?
Well, that's still a problem.
Yeah, that's a big problem. That's where the mental health, and also we need to observe into how, let's say, like medication is dispersed and those type of things, right? But actual gun murders, the number is roughly around 8,000, and that's due to mostly gang violence and all these type of things, and all of those, 90% of all of those all of that number is usually handguns, right?
The liberal obsession with like defeating the assault rifle is fucking brain dead. The suicide is an issue. I mean, this is also a gun issue. It's very, very easy to kill yourself if you have access to a firearm. The majority of like gun murders are done in sort of a gang drug war context, which is one of the reasons why intergenerational poverty and the drug war both need to end. I completely agree with you. That does not mean, though, that the NRA is free from criticism. The NRA is a dogshit organization that does more to harm America than basically any other gun advocacy organization in the history of this country. So while I am very much in favor of the Second Amendment, I am not in favor of the other people who champion it.
Can you give me a reason why the NRA, why you have that perspective of the NRA?
Because the NRA is like a far-right abetting movement that constantly downplays the extent to which, for one, the NRA lobbied to prevent the CDC from being able to measure, like, to even study gun crimes, which is wild. I mean, talk about being anti-free speech, literally preventing the state from being able to do research into a subject. The NRA has constantly cohabitated with far-right groups that, fucking like Ted Nugent being like a perfect example, who glorify guns as like this hyper masculine, like, oh, you know, one of these days the government's going to come and take our guns and you need to be ready to stand up for it. The NRA is nothing more than like a far right like NGO, basically. Its promotion of gun rights begins and ends at the extent to which it benefits their corporate sort of donors. I mean, a good example of this is the fact that Ronald Reagan, you know, famously pro-gun, the only time he ever passed any gun reform, any anti-gun legislation, was when the Black Panther Party was, you know, holding guns outside courthouses in California. So when the black folk had guns, he saw fit to take them from them. But otherwise, the subject is completely off the table. Also, the NRA mostly benefits gun manufacturers rather than like people's ownership of guns. It's not a good meme.
All right, man. Sounds good. Thanks for your perspective and thanks for being here.
No problem. Love you, buddy.
All right, so Rayson wanted to ask you a question concerning democracy. If you want to unmute yourself, Rayson, you can do it.
I love democracy.
Oh, okay. That answers my first question. The second question was what? Hold on, crap. Let me get the question. How would your ideal democracy function, and how would it deal with factionalism/lobbying?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that we need lobbying reform in this country. Like, this isn't even like a big socialist revolution thing. Just like fundamentally, the way we treat lobbying in this country is pretty fucking broken. Everyone knows this. Like, well, unless most people know this, I think. So that's not even like a big change in society thing. I think that's a problem we can work to address right now. Also, mind you, in a society where wealth plays less of a role in the power of individual actors, lobbying groups will themselves proportionally have less power, because the ability for a lobbyist to influence the opinions and sort of legislation of legislators, these things are tied pretty directly to the extent to which wealthy people have control over society, the extent to which wealthy people influence, tug the strings, however you prefer to phrase it. So in a society which is worker controlled, in a society in which there are no billionaires, no millionaires, where there are no people who have risen to the top through cruel, merciless exploitation of their workers, there is less proportionate power to be extended into the lobbying machine. In regards to factionalism, I don't know if that's ever going to change. We've seen factionalism in government for, I've never like researched any sort of pseudo-democratic system that hasn't had some degree of factionalism. But one of the best ways that you can address it, like broadly as a concept, is through the education of the common people. It is usually through poor education or through propagandizing that people who have similar class interest end up having wildly different opinions on issues that should be simple. So through better education, I think we'll see factionalism arrive on issues that are a little bit more niche, a little bit more esoteric, open to discussion, but hopefully less factionalism on highly important, heavily driven topics that are meaningful and necessary to the common man, pretty much ubiquitously.
Wouldn't the factions be based on these common people's interests? I mean, yeah, I think education can work, but I guess it would work insofar as refraining particular people within the commune to support a particular faction. If anything, it would just create another faction in and of itself, and it would compete with the other within this democracy.
I don't know what you mean by faction. Do you mean like an additional syndicate?
Be they other competing syndicates, or just interests that pertain to a particular syndicate, maybe due to the fact that they're based on a particular Jew. They might have more access to natural resources compared to other syndicates. Or there might even be power struggles that may arise for whatever reason. I know this is assuming material reasons for power struggles may be eliminated.
Yeah,
it just might be the case.
Well, different syndicates competing for resources is a completely different question than like democratic factionalism. when it comes to voting. If you're talking about like competition among syndicates, like I would argue that in a non-profit driven system that is nonetheless markets driven, where you have people trying to meet market needs but without there being a broader economic incentive for economic success, that there would be more of an incentive for cooperation than competition. And for that reason, factionalism amongst different syndicates would be less likely. But again, we're treading into theory territory that I would need to read more on. But in regards to the factionalism within the democracy, I mean, there's always going to be an extent of factionalism within democratic sort of systems. That's I mean, I don't know, that's democracy. Sometimes things aren't perfectly efficient. Sometimes people disagree for stupid reasons. Sometimes they disagree for good reasons. I would seek to amend that factionalism by ensuring that people live in society that propagandizes as little as possible, so people will, at least on issues that are simple or issues that meaningfully benefit pretty much everyone, be mostly unified.
That would be through education or propaganda, as others would say.
I mean, if you believe all education is propaganda, I mean, don't get me wrong, all education is politically charged, sure, but I think there are different degrees of propagandizing.
Fair enough.
Yeah, like... Yeah. I agree that, well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I agree. All forms of education are, in a way, propagandizing. There's no educated person on this planet who has not seen their education affected by the political mores of their time in society. Hopefully we can minimize that. You know, I do like truth as a concept.
Okay.
You mind if I take over?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so I had a quick question before I ask this next question.
Kill me.
Are there any topics that you don't want to get into, like recent drama, for example?
I love drama.
Okay. You're in luck because Squishy
Is that a guinea pig?
Has a question.
Oh, am I unmuted now? Oh
You're
shit! Yeah. Hi, Vaush.
You
I used
made
to
like
watch
a
you a lot.
Guinea pig noise. Oh, howdy.
I was wondering what compelled you to send dick pics to women and sexually harass them, and how do you plan to correct the behavior and be an example for rehabilitation of predatory men in the future?
Damn. I don't think I sent any dick pics to anyone. Who did I send dick pics to?
Really? So
Yeah.
you weren't under the name Irish Laddie at one point?
No, I totally was. I don't believe I sent dick pics to anyone. In
So
fact,
the
I believe the
screenshots
people
that were
who
leaked?
accuse of dick pics. Could you provide a picture of my penis?
No.
I
I'd actually like to see
I
it.
remember sending a picture of my knee, and I sent a picture of my forehead. I don't believe I sent any dick pictures.
So you're saying that there was no sexual harassment that took place?
Oh, no, there absolutely was. I was definitely pretty creepy and pushy with that person, unquestionably. It was
so
a
then
shitty
how do
thing
you
to do.
plan to be an example for predatory men in the future of things not to do? How
That's
come you never
an
bring it up?
incredibly like a presumptive thing of me to say. Why would I ever pose myself as like the model of rehabilitation? People make mistakes. Whether or not they do well to mend those mistakes and improve in the future has as much to do with their intentions as it does with like the mores of fate. I would never like presumptuously say, yes, everyone now learn from my improvement. I would only seek to do good in the world, to see people's perceptions of me change with the information available to them, and to hopefully indicate to people that while I have made mistakes, as have we all, I have continued to, since that point, do my best to make the world a better place and meaningfully address the systems that led to me making those mistakes in the first place.
Oh, wait a minute. Did you address this at some point in a video? Because I don't remember you ever addressing the sexual harassment.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I made a video on it, and it's come up quite a bit. I mean, people love to circulate this drama about me because, I mean, it was aired in a very public forum on Destiny's stream. But yeah, I've absolutely discussed this. I don't, like, hide any of this at all.
What do you mean? Why?
Why would I hide it? That would be kind of shitty of me, right? If I did
Oh,
something
I thought you
bad
said you
then...
didn't like it. I thought you were trying to hide it. I read that.
Well, don't get me wrong. I don't like it, but no, I wouldn't hide it. I mean, that'd be kind of shitty and exploitative of me if I did bad things and then like banned people who mentioned it. Now, I do like block people who spam like fucking screenshots at me all the time because that's kind of annoying. But like in terms of actually addressing it, I'm pretty open about it. I don't think I've really hidden it.
How did you handle it with the woman that was a victim?
Well, that person, and this is where things get a little bit dicey. My behavior was unquestionably bad. I don't think it was as bad as many people make it out to be. Obviously, there's always going to be a little bit of gray area there, the extent to which you prescribe negativity to a bad thing that was done. Unfortunately, I think that the person who was a victim of my harassment is a bad faith actor. I think that they are...
oh, that sounds like blaming the victim. Come on, don't be such a shitbag about that. You were doing so well in the first half of this, Vaush. What happened?
Thank you. So anyway, because I'm not an idiot, I recognize that it's possible there is enough nuance in the world to simultaneously say I did a bad thing to a person, but then also say that person is being a dick and is also lying about it. I don't know, like maybe you weren't around for like the big...
What were they lying about?
Well, we can get into that if you'd like. Your automatic presumption that any criticism of the person who I harassed is an indication of me being like disingenuous indicates that there's not really much of a point in trying to convince you. But the person...
Wait, what automatic presumption did I make? I just asked you a question.
You just said, come on, you were doing so well. That sounds victim blaming. That's a presumption.
You're not saying in some way saying that the person was a bad faith actor and is making shit up doesn't sound like victim blaming to you?
Not particularly. That is a thing that can happen. I recognize there is enough nuance in the world to know that it is simultaneously possible for somebody to do a bad thing to another person, and then for the victim of that act to also themselves be a bad person. Not only is that like nuanced,
but them
I don't even
being a
think
bad
that's
person is irrelevant.
Not really.
To them being a victim. No. Then you're saying that people who are bad, then them being a victim is sort of is caused by them being bad.
No, only that them being a bad person means that they can be dishonest.
That it's an excuse.
No.
But the thing is,
Wait. Okay, listen. I understand.
Place?
Listen, I understand if you're really, really upset and you just want to get across like the allegations or whatever. I'm happy to explain it. But
no,
yeah.
I'm having a discussion with you. A discussion, interruptions do happen. It's a normal flow of conversation. I'm sure you're aware of that. I've watched your debates and you've said that plenty of times before too. So when I interrupt, I'm asking about a topic that you just brought up.
So let's actually discuss this. Okay. So do you acknowledge that it is possible to do a bad thing to a person, but for the person to also do bad things and dishonestly represent what took place? There's only one answer to this.
I think that's irrelevant to you doing a bad thing.
Okay, sure, I agree, which is why at no point have I said that my harassment is any less of a problem because of their behavior. The only reason I mentioned their behavior is because you specifically asked about them. At no point did I use that to minimalize the harassment allegations. If you want to talk about them specifically, they have lied quite a bit online about...
I don't care about that. I asked about how you tried to rectify the situation.
I already answered that.
About them having...
Then why'd you ask about them?
That was the question. What? That was the question.
Wait, I'm sorry. Am I misremembering? I'm pretty sure chat, can you fill me in here? I'm pretty sure I specifically remember you asking directly about my perception of that person.
I remember.
I'm pretty sure I remember that. What was the exact
wording of the question? Because I asked...
I don't know. Why don't you keep track of what you asked?
Maybe I worded it differently. Maybe I worded it differently, but the intended question was, how did you go about rectifying, or what's the word in legal speak? Balancing the weights of the person that you wronged.
I have made
and instead
you
brought up that person lied too. I don't know how that's relevant.
It is perfectly relevant because the extent to which I can meaningfully rectify a situation with a person depends on how good in faith they are willing to address that. So I will answer then in a way that is less likely to trigger you. I have tried to apologize to the person who I harassed. I have tried to meaningfully apologize. I have reached out to them multiple times. They do not seem interested in hearing my apology, nor do they seem interested meaningfully in reaching any sort of accord. Not that they are obligated to. It is not necessary for a victim of harassment to forgive or even acknowledge the person who committed it.
So I'm wondering, how is it that you planned on going about this in a good faith way when you started describing it as this person lied too? It seems like you might have gone into that pretty, I don't know, accusatory of the victim?
No. Actually, I opened this by being 100% open with my failings. So for you to say I went into this by accusing them is, I think, pretty misleading.
I'm talking about that you went into their conversation.
Went into their conversation?
You going, when you entered into a conversation with
you have no idea how I spoke to them. Why would you assume?
That's what I'm asking. What the fuck?
You didn't ask. You said you came into this in a bad way.
Ask.
You made
I'm
a
saying it sounds like you
prescriptive
came
statement.
into it in a bad
That's a
way with how you're
prescriptive
describing the
statement.
victim.
All right.
I'm saying
Okay.
it sounds like you went
I
into it in
think
a bad
you-
way.
You didn't ask. You came into it with a prescriptive statement. Are you okay? Are you feeling well? I'm sick.
I think that's enough. We're kind of getting off topic. It's kind of disappointing that had to go down that way. I'm sorry, Vosh.
I'm
Okay.
fine. I've had better conversations on the subject. To answer super quickly though, like free of any like sort of like bad faith pinicking, people do bad things. I have done a bad thing. The fact that multiple people do many bad things does not in any way, shape, or form minimize the extent to which one person doing a bad thing is serious or severe. While I have not by any means handled the situation perfectly, I have made a good faith effort both to sort of amend and expand upon the extent to which this took place, to not silence discussion over it, and to try and reframe discourse around the issue in a way that promotes sort of more mindfulness when it comes to how people engage with others. I've talked not only about this incident, but also in the many, many ways in which men can be predatory when they talk to women online. And speaking from that experience, I can say that a lot of people could stand to learn quite a bit on that subject.
Yeah. As a guy with a PP myself, I totally get it. Okay, it's not a big. Next question from Redacted. Do you think the leftism movement will ultimately conquer the alt-right? I.e., do you see all your ideologies succeeding?
Oh,
Every single one.
I'm by no means a historical determinist. We could all end up dying. No. The alt-right as a specific movement is probably not doomed to last because most fascist insurgencies tend to be very unprincipled and tumultuous. There's a reason why most like lefty advocacy that takes place in this country is done by people who fit pretty dominantly within the framework of like respectable lefty advocacy, but a lot of fascists and Nazis are like dumb fuck degenerates who lie constantly about their values. Fascism is internally contradictory, so people who try to promote fascism will usually do so in a way that is self-destructive. That doesn't mean that it's going to die forever. It just means that in the long run, it's going to be more tumultuous. Leftism as a political and social sort of movement has had a pretty continuous line of thought for about a century and a half in terms of like the legacy of the writings and the thinkers and how the sort of the dialectic moves forward. These things have maintained a fair degree of consistency, but this is not the case with fascism or Nazism. While the alt-right days are probably numbered, the days of fascism, white supremacy, white nationalism, Nazism, these things will continue for quite a long time. And I can't tell you whether or not we're going to win in the end.
Okay. Next is from Cornholio, or Jonathan, as you guys. You're unmuted.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So you said fascism was self-contradictory, and you also sort of lumped white nationalism, white supremacy, and fascism in the same group. Do you recognize the distinction, and can you also explain how fascism is self-contradictory?
Oh, well, of course there are distinctions, but like only a fool would say that there aren't like overlaps between these things. Pretty much all white nationalists are white supremacists to some degree. Many white supremacists don't openly call themselves white nationalists, but sure do seem to push for some consistent immigration policy. And fascists are, at least here in the West, almost predominantly white nationalists as well. Like there's a huge amount of interplay between these three things. But in returns to how fascism is internally like self-contradictory, there is the supposition of the will of the people that is constantly contradicting with the imposition of state authoritarianism. There is the class collaboration angle, which elevates like the individual as a hero, as a martyr for society, but simultaneously promotes an economic system that relegates them essentially to a serf. There are the social prescriptions of sort of liberation and autonomy, masculinity, and freedom from like foreign agents, while simultaneously subjecting your population to political and social systems that deride them, that make them less than a person, that make them machines. There are a lot of internal contradictions in fascism because it's more of an emotional rebellion against the alienation of capitalism. More so than it is like a super cogent, consistent set of principles meant to, you know, meaningfully critique and address capitalism. such forth. Of course, that's not to say that all fascists individually are internally contradictory. There are some fascists who actually have extremely consistent and philosophically a valid internal systems, but those people tend to have axiomatic values very different than mine, so there's not much point in reasoning with them.
So where do you get your info? Just to follow up on that quick, if you don't mind, where do you have you read fascist literature, or where do you get your information up?
I've heard this a lot from fascists, that reading fascist literature is the way to like learn about fascism.
I'm not a fascist, to be clear.
Sorry, I've read like Mein Kampf. It was kind of dog shit. I know that's not fascist literature. Well, it is, but it's not like the predominant.
No, it's just
economic.
funny. That's what everyone says, right?
Well, because everyone's read Mein Kampf, right? It's like a good meme, you know? No, I haven't read like principled fascist literature or anything. Most of my understanding of like the interplay between capitalism and fascism stems from the analysis of leftists, and also from articles, books, research papers that engage with the historical materialism, which is a fundamentally like prescriptive leftist lens of analysis of fascist societies, how they work socially. While the sort of literature on fascism is a little bit all over the place, I've yet to speak to a fascist who didn't like validate my perspective on these issues. So,
okay. I just wanted to know. I'm not a fascist or a white nationalist.
Sorry. I see the people in the discussion of the Discord. It's obviously there are quite a bit of folks here who disagree with me, so I might be slightly over defensive in that respect, but still, I appreciate the question.
Okay, Jonathan, you're definitely a fascist. What would you do?
Hey.
Okay. Okay, next question.
Damn, lying again. More internal contradictions. Yeah. He said he wouldn't, but then he was.
He's fucking fascist. Okay, next question is from Chad King. Go for it, Chad. Whenever you're ready.
All right. First, I'd like to thank you for participating in this AMA and your willingness to answer questions that are a little bit mired in controversy. I know that can be challenging, but like it is a good way to address the issue, especially done publicly as often as possible. I know it was a little bit rough, but again, thanks for that.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to be here. I love the tough questions. That's how we grow.
Exactly. So there's two questions. This one's from one of the users who wanted to ask an ANCAP user what you thought about anarcho-capitalism / libertarianism, and then some commentary since it is the purest form of anarchy.
Well, I mean, I'm obviously not a fan of anarcho-capitalism. It's fundamentally like a self-defeating concept. Anarchy is all about destroying hierarchy. Capitalism is about like maintaining the greatest degree of class hierarchy that is possible with modern technology and social development. So the interaction here is, I think there's no way to like meaningfully parse out ANCAP ideology, and most of the people that I've talked to who describe themselves as ANCAPs or libertarians are just like fascists in waiting. In reality, they don't like the idea of being controlled by a state actor, but they're totally okay with being on a board of executives that leverage power in an area that is comparable to the way in which a state does so. I have like if somebody ever wants to come on and have a principled discussion on anarcho-capitalism with me, I would be happy to do so, because it's not like there's any real literature on the subject. But until that point, I have like no respect for that ideology.
No, I agree. I think it's essentially privatized hierarchy, and it's just shifting the power into private hands and offering the average person less control. So here is a question that I want to pose, and it's asking what your criticism is of centralized party socialists, or like tankies, as you would put it. What is the main criticism?
I just don't like authoritarianism. I like freedom as a concept. I like people being able to live lives where they have the greatest amount of control over their own personal outcomes possible. That's very, very important to me. Everyone, from the wealthiest to the poorest, from the blackest to the whitest, I want all of these people to be able to live free lives as minimally influenced by social, political, or economic pressures as possible. This leads me from my positions on anarchism all the way to my positions on gender abolitionism. To destroy the concept of gender is to free people from another hierarchy that might otherwise influence their behavior. I don't have a technical problem with the concept of centralized planning, but centralized planning usually, so if in that you're taking economic control into the hands of a central apparatus. Usually this corresponds with taking political or social control into the hands of a central apparatus. That said, again, while I'm principally iffy about it, I would be very much open to reading literature or educating myself more in the subject. Maybe there are ways this could be integrated into an ethical free society that I'm not currently aware of.
So the question that I would pose is, insofar as central planning is concerned, it wouldn't necessarily mean that there wouldn't be more local planning done, but there being a central figure. So in a system where there is a central figure, would that be opposed to a system that you'd more willingly advocate for?
Well, since I'm about flattening hierarchies as much as possible, having a central figure or a central system that's in charge of something that grave, something that important, would be a pretty substantial hierarchy. Again, I would need to read more into this, I think, before I can make any strong prescriptive statements. But at this moment, I am, and I probably always will be, pretty suspicious of any power or any system that takes power out of the hands of the majority and puts it into a smaller, more concentrated space.
Yeah, that's a fair response. Thank you.
No problem. But I want to learn more, I guess. Hopefully I don't die for 60 years. You know, I got plenty of time to read.
Okay. Next question is going to be from Kira Pika. I'm going to mute you. Go for it.
Am I muted? All right, thank you. So my question was, why does your view of gender conflict with basic biology? Because from what you said earlier, from at least what I heard, it was that you believe in destroying gender norms or something along those lines.
More than that, I want to destroy gender.
All right, so how do you do that? I'm just curious. Like, how does that work
So
when it comes to biology and XY chromosomes and like stuff like that? Like,
yeah, okay. So I've done this one before. So for one, gender and sex are different things. This isn't like some SJW propaganda. They refer literally to different things. Sex refers to the physiological characteristics surrounding one's sort of chromosomal archetypes, whereas gender refers to the social prescriptions that are associated with those archetypes. There is nothing biological, for example, about me being expected to wear a suit, but a woman being expected to wear a dress. You can't find that in genes. That's social, hence it's gender. So when we talk about gender abolitionism, I'm not talking about like invalidating the concept of biology. There's a lot of people like to do this meme like, trans people, basic biology, XXXY. For one, it's pretty reductive because modern science has shown that even sex, not just gender, exists on a continuum. It's more bimodal than binary. I've read a very, very fascinating paper from the Scientific American that discusses the many ways in which people can deviate from the archetypically expected XXXY framework. But additionally, even if that wasn't the case, even if we just said there are literally just XXXY, those are the only two groups of people, you also have to take into account that when on like a day-to-day basis, most of the decisions that we make concerning gender have really nothing to do with our biology. The way we like treat people of the opposite sex, the way we choose to dress, the way we present ourselves or groom ourselves or wear our hairstyles or tattoo or ear piercing or talk to other people, the power moves we make in politics, not just legislative politics, but like family, friends, business. These are not biology. There's some you can make, like testosterone leads maybe to more aggressiveness, but for the most part, these are social prescriptions. And there are societies in the past that have had very different attitudes on how men and women should act. With all of that said, when we sort of distance sex from gender as concepts, when I talk about gender abolitionism, I'm not talking about anything ascientific. Sex will still exist. There will still be big floppy dongs and vagubers, you know, we'll still have the beautiful range of genitalia, and those will still be ways in which you can refer to one another, you know. But what I want to remove is the set of social prescriptions that associate with sex. I want to destroy things like, oh, you have a penis, therefore, or oh, you have a vagina, therefore, because I think that these prescriptions entail unjust hierarchies.
So can I get like a quick response? So first off, I was gonna say, so for literally all of human history, sex and gender have been the same thing, right? Until, I don't know when, but until very recently, right? And then the second one would be like, so you said that you want to destroy these gender like norms, right?
We can just focus
So-
on the first point if you want, because you're already wrong.
All right, go ahead.
Sex and gender literally refer to different things. This isn't like a throughout history thing. They're two separate terms that refer to two separate things. People act like, oh, throughout history, the sex and the gender were the exact same, but then we divorced it because of libcuck professors. This is not the case. 1,000 years ago, the fashions that were worn by men and women in fucking medieval Europe were every bit as divorced from their biology as they are today. So, like, just because terminology has expanded to explain differences in like social groupings, that doesn't mean that like those groupings have only just recently begun to exist. It means that in the process of becoming better at understanding the world, we have grown more apt in our descriptions of how people behave. But if you really want to dice out hairs on that, there are writings that are divorce the concepts of sex and gender in many societies throughout history. There have been societies with different numbers of genders. There have been societies that have had different conceptions of how people of different genders should act. And there have been writers who have described genders not by their having a dick or a pussy or whatever, but rather by their sort of socially prescribed roles. All of these things fit within the very much historical conceptualization of gender and sex being different things. They just describe different things, you know? It'd be like saying, like if for some reason we thought that two closely grouped species of like squirrel or something were the same forever, but then we run tests and actually there was a bottleneck millions of years ago. They're actually very different. So we refer to them now as different species. For somebody to then go, they were the same species for thousands of years. Only recently we discovered, like, no, the terms have changed, but only to better reflect the reality we live with.
All right, so also the other one that you said was that you want to destroy these social norms, but like it's not like anyone's forcing you to wear a dress because you're a woman, right? It's not like this is being forced. It's a norm, all right? It's no. It doesn't mean it's being forced. So what do you mean? Like, do you want to like enforce people? Like, I'm confused how you're going to implement that.
There is an expectation. Well, no, I don't want to force anyone. I just want to emphasize the unimportance of adhering to those roles. No. Yeah, people aren't forced like at gunpoint, but there are absolutely social consequences for not aligning with your prescribed like gender-based social roles. When I say like the roles coerce people, I don't mean like the state comes in with a gun and puts it to your head and tells you to put the fucking suit on, Shinji. More that socially we expect things, and as is the case with expectations, when those expectations are not met, there are usually consequences. It's funny that you're saying that, but I'd be willing to bet, given the fairly large fascist presence on this server, that a lot of people here believe that like men shouldn't cry, or like men shouldn't be like overly emotional, or that it's feminine or womanly, or like bitch or beta or soy or whatever. I'd be willing to bet a large number of dudes on this server believe that. That's an example right there of men not adhering to gendered expectations in a way that actively hurts them. And there have been societies in the past that have had the opposite opinion. In ancient Greece, for example, to cry as a man was considered masculine because it reflected a sincere expression of your emotional reality. It meant you were confident in how you felt. It meant you were a warrior, a hero. You were in an epic. Your emotions were grand and powerful. You had to express them through your sobbing, you know? So yeah, like there are absolutely consequences for not following in on this. I vow, gender abolitionism, if you've got a penis, we're going to force you to cry 24/7, okay? Non-stop.
All right, so my one question to you is, other than like someone calling you a faggot or something, what actual consequences are there? Because like there really are.
Okay. I mean,
like people like making fun of you. I mean, that's
very valid. Yes, being made fun of is a problem. If you'd like, we can go over the 2018 LGBT American Census, where we describe the extent to which deviating from the expected partner you're supposed to have as a man has massive social consequences for you. I can bring it up now. Increased suicide rates, rejection from your parents, a higher degree of social ostracization, a higher degree of homelessness. All of this because if you're a man, you're supposed to fuck girls, and if you're a girl, you're supposed supposed to fuck men. And deviating from those things can lead to some pretty substantial condemnation from the people that you live with. I mean, this is like hard data here. If you want to go over stats, let me tell you, not adhering to gender norms is that's a big old problem for a lot of people.
I don't see sexuality as a gender norm. I think that was a little bit of a derail.
No. The expectation that men should have sex with women and women with men is unquestionably a gender norm. Sexuality is framed through the gender like binary as it exists in this country. Wouldn't you say there's an expectation that men like fuck women and women fuck men? Like that's totally a gender norm.
I wouldn't see it as I mean, it's just a norm. It's not. It has nothing to do with gender.
How can it not if the definition has men and women in it?
Of people do it. That's normal, right? Because that's what a majority. That's what like
you're describing a gender norm right
population.
now. It's an expectation that people of a certain gender do a certain thing, or they will face social ostracization, and that ostracization leads to material harm, which I can back up through data. You're literally describing the consequences of not standing up, of not like adhering to a gender norm right now.
I don't see like what exactly that has to do. All right, so if you're gonna take another example, like say like a men wearing whatever suits, women wearing dresses, yes, that's a norm that has to do with gender, but it's not a gender norm. There's like a difference, all right?
No,
So
wait. What is the difference between a gender? Wait, what is the difference between a gender norm and a norm that has to do with gender? What is the difference between those two things?
So the difference is one of those is biological.
No, you're doing it. No, you're doing it. We're talking about gender. We're talking about gender. These are two different things. I knew you were going to do that. We're talking about gender, not sex. I'm not criticizing the sexual norms or whatever, though those do exist. That's not what I'm talking about here.
Okay, well then you're talking about LGBT and you're talking about gender, right? And even though that's sexual.
Okay. All right. I don't think we're going to come to an accord on this. You literally described like a gender norm, and I described the ways in which it hurts you if you don't adhere to it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kirby. Our next question is from my good friend, Miss Fatima. You are unmuted. Go.
Thank you. Hello, Vash.
Howdy.
So my question is, are you supporting Bernie as the Democratic candidate for this election? And do you think that if he becomes a candidate, that will push away voters that are particularly in the Rust Belt and centrist that will be needed for Bernie to beat Trump?
Listen, I'm a Bernie boy, okay? I love me some Bernie, all right? Bernie, if for no other reason than because of his honesty and political consistency. So I absolutely support him. He's not going to bring in like the socialist revolution or whatever, but like, yeah, of course, love him. Cool duderino, okay? In terms of whether or not I think he's like electable or he has and whether or not he's electable or he's going to alienate workers in the Rust Belt. I've actually read some really interesting papers and studies which suggest to me that his electability might be more decent than people give him credit for. The Rust Belt I'm not too worried about because Bernie is, unfortunately, a protectionist, meaning he's one of those people who talks about getting jobs out from overseas to bring back our coal workers, that sort of thing. So I think that is going to hit pretty hard with a lot of Rust Belties. But really, at the end of the day, I think that people align themselves more closely with populist rhetoric than they do with actual policy prescriptions. And Bernie is a populist in a way that Joe Biden never could be, Sleepy Joe. I think that energy is something the American people are looking for right now, far more than they are some hyper-balanced, moderate, sensible candidate. I feel like the Democratic Party is making the same mistake right now that they made with Hillary Clinton. And oh God, Hillary Clinton might end up running. Oh God, did you see the fundraiser? The fucking $15,000 to $45,000 fundraiser? I think she's gonna do it. She's gonna come in. Oh fucking God. Oh my God, it's gonna be Trump 2 terms. Whatever. I'm an accelerationist now. If Trump wins in 2020, I was an accelerationist the entire time, okay? I actually was in favor of it. In case anyone knows. In case anyone wants to know.
Thank you, Vash.
No problem. Bernie 2020.
Okay. Next question is from Mr. Juice again. Juice, you can unmute yourself whenever you're ready.
All right. I just wanted to ask you a question concerning homosexuality.
I love homosexuality.
Oh, are you gay?
Oh, am I gay? Yeah, I'm pansexual. Yeah, I'm like bi, basically. I fuck around. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask another question actually. I mean the real question though. Do
Yeah.
you think homosexuality has to do with genes? Like, do you think it's genetical, like you know, the color of your hair, you know?
I don't know. It might be, right? Because there is, so being gay does correlate to other biological, like for instance, I think that like gay men are statistically more likely to have a larger penis, for example, and I think that there is some validity to like twin study tests that show that it's more likely that if you're two twins, you're both going to be gay. So I think yeah, there probably is a strong genetic component to homosexuality, but I don't think it's like gay people will have gay kids forever and ever. It's more like there's a big cluster of genes that might in some way correspond to a whole, like there's a bunch of alleles that are like present in everyone that have a small chance of being flipped or whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah, but I would say it's probably genetic. At least mostly. There's always a social component.
I mean, by what you're saying, it feels like you're more saying that it is, you know, environmental. Because
no.
you said,
oh, how so?
You said it's a cluster of cells, and it doesn't, you know, necessarily make you, you know, gay in this case.
Well, no, but if you have a cluster of genes that roughly correspond to the likelihood of somebody being gay or pan or whatever, if you like, that would be a genetic thing. Now, environment can influence genetics, both on an epigenetic level, which I think is pseudoscience, or at least mostly pseudoscience, but also in the sense that many genes that flip on or off are sort of conditioned into environmental, circumstances that influence the extent to which those genes flip on and off. So in that respect, I would say, I mean, it probably has a social component, but I would say it's largely genetic. But again, I am not a biologist. This is very out of my wheelhouse. Whether or not it's biological or genetic, you know, I support the gay agenda. We're all good. I don't think it's relevant to like questions concerning civil rights, for example.
Yeah, I mean, all right. I guess every human deserves, you know, the right to do whatever, you know, they want, as long as they don't harm other people.
Yeah, for sure.
But like I'm talking about, you know, if this is an actual identity or it's just, you know, sexual behavior.
Oh, I
you know
mean,
what I mean?
Yeah.
Sexual
Like,
conduct.
What the fuck? Oh, I hit the fucking mic stand. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what extent to which genetic. This would be I've done literally no research on this. I know that there's some genetic correspondence with like twin studies, but beyond that, I don't really know. It's not like of interest to me, because even if like all the fucking far right shit was true and like all gay people were just like beaten or molested as children and it's all like a paraphilia or whatever, it's not true, of course. But even if that was true, it wouldn't change my advocacy for gay people. And even if it was 100% genetic, locked in gene wise, there's nothing you can do, I'd still support them. So it doesn't really affect my social prescriptions.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I mean, I was just wondering, since BBC, you know, released or published, you know, some articles on this like 3 days ago, showing that basically that there is no gene that is literally associated with, you know, homosexuality. The same genes that can, you know, make that people, you know, you basically try to say makes you homosexual, also, you know, goes both ways, meaning that they also can, you know, make you heterosexual.
Well,
So
there's probably no single gene, but there's probably like a really a wide collection of genes that correspond roughly. You know, but yeah, no. Again, this is very much out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Jude.
I love you.
Next question is from the Action Kid. Action Kid, you are go for it. Any second now.
I'm ready.
Oh, no, he's not going to do it. Okay. Sorry,
Oh,
Mr.
no.
Then next question is going to be from. Let's go with Mil. Okay, Milbar. It's usually a nice guy. Mr. Milbar, you're unmuted.
I actually wanted my my question retracted because that was before I knew who he was. So
I love you.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Mub. You're very helpful. Next question. Next question. Let's go with Mohsin, if he's still in here. I'm just gonna ask it. Are all cultures morally equal?
Morally equal?
Yep.
No. I have a set of moral judgments and axiomatic values that I think different cultures live up to different extents.
Okay. Next one's gonna be from Magical Swamp Wizard. And you are go.
Hello.
Yo.
Oh, wait. Hold on. Sorry, I was eating.
Okay.
Which question? I put a lot up there.
Yeah. Pick a couple.
Which one?
They're your questions. Pick a couple.
I lost this soul. I have to find them again.
Wait, you don't remember your questions?
No, I found that. No, I found it.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess you kind of covered it, but do you support the communist way of looking? And if so, how can you compare that to Nazism, where the communists had a large impact on the people of the world in a negative way? The left has done way more harm than the right. How can you support a way of life where the many are forced to suffer for the needs of the few? Immigrants, refugees, foreigners come into a certain country, cost money before the country can even afford to pay for their own citizens.
Do you have like an actual question, or did you just want to read out like the Black Book of Communism?
No, what I'm asking
how can you support communism in spite of the fact that it supplements the individual in favor of a collectivist ideology that has murdered billions? Like, okay, what's your actual question?
Do you support refugees? Do you support immigration?
Well, I mean, I'm like a full internationalist type, so yeah, fuck borders. Yeah, I mean, I support immigration sensibly right now, because right now the way the world is structured couldn't really handle America just lowering its borders. That would be incredibly destructive. But like as a concept, yeah, absolutely. I want people to be able to live free lives, free to move wherever they like, to experience the fruits of life in whatever country or geographic region they choose.
Even if it harms others?
I don't think in an ideal world that would harm others.
But we're not in an ideal world. We're on this
Which is why I just said I would want it to be sensibly introduced until we could develop a political system that would accommodate those goals.
Yeah, but right now, shit's not going to happen like that. It's gonna take
do you have like a specific yes, no, or like a specific juxtaposition? Because this is like a super complicated topic, and it goes a little bit beyond how can you support immigration when it hurts people? Like, I don't know, helps people too.
What I'm saying is that refugees come into the United States, to come into Canada, and in my country, in Norway, we're letting in too many fucking people. And it's hurting our people more than it's doing good.
Usually when people say that we let in too many people, they don't really have like data to back that up. They just kind of don't like brown people.
What do you mean?
Well, let's talk about America, because I'm sorry, I'm sure Norway's cool. I just don't know much about it. You know, I'm an American boy. But here in America, I have not seen any data to indicate that the number of refugees we take in any way, shape, or form hurts our domestic population.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, they commit like lower per capita crime rates. Like, yeah, how?
First of all, I don't mean to bash the Muslims of this chat, but a majority of them are Muslim. You know, a lot of them come in expecting change to the way that a country runs itself. You know, demanding that this country change its laws to accommodate for their way of living. We're giving you a place to fucking live. You better be fucking thankful. As much as I fucking hate immigration,
this is kind of my problem with having these conversations with people like you. You're just like really like feelings based. Like, we give you everything and you take from us and you complain. Like what do you want? Like, can we talk like data? Like, in what way do refugees coming into like America hurt us? I asked you and you haven't given me anything. When refugees come in, that's usually the decision of the state. That's America working with the United Nations, who provides a refugee list in the America, then takes a portion of that refugee list, a very small portion, I think like 1% or something. We subject them to scrutiny from our intelligence agencies, and then we allow them into the country. These people usually are done because we feel we have a moral obligation to help people who are living with less fortunate circumstances abroad. Now, I am not a nationalist. I think that a human being born...
Well, I am.
I know. I think a human being born in Syria is worth as much as a human being born in America. That's sort of an axiomatic principle of mine. I think that basing the value of a human life off the country they're born in is dumb fuck. So if a Syrian refugee wants to live in America, I am essentially, if I grant them access into this country, giving them a new life in a stable country with comparatively high economic opportunity and comparatively low levels of criminality. They are less likely to engage in criminality than the average domestic American. It seems to me like I am essentially saving a life for basically no gain. That seems like a pretty easy win for me. Now, if you go into more contentious forms of immigration, like the Browns coming in, 1 million per year, I believe it is, or something in that ballpark, it seems to me that the benefit that is incurred upon these people's lives easily outweighs any minor and relatively segmented economic harm that is caused to certain portions of the population, which could then be compensated for by the broader economic benefit that these people bring to the country. But even if...
Kidding me, right?
No. And if you could argue any of those points, please take it up with the Mises Institute, because I'm literally regurgitating libertarian talking points right now. So if you want to argue on an economic basis, the foundations of immigration and how it affects America, that's not a conversation you're going to win, buddy. If you want to talk about like cultural impact, because that's what you people like to focus
a lot
on.
of cultural impact.
Right, I know, but that's what you should focus on, because the scary brown people, because the economic argument you can't really win. The total economic benefit of bringing in immigrants outweighs any comparatively small harm done to blue collar work.
A foreign Syrian citizen has more worth than an American citizen in American society?
I never said more worth. I said equal worth.
Yes, but how are they equal?
What the fuck? Because they're both humans. Why would I?
Yes, they are humans, but an American citizen should come first before some foreign invader.
Foreign invader. Dude, do you have like any actual arguments, or do you just want to like cry and write out your feelings in crayon?
No, I'm not crying. Do you hear me crying?
I mean, you're crying with your words, my friend. I'm very emotionally in tune with how you feel right now. You're sobbing right now. Foreign invader who's been repped by the United Nations and brought in willingly by the United States government and brings essentially no harm to this country. The brown people. Dude, listen, if you have a problem with like brown people in the country, like why not just say, I don't like brown people. I think they're scary.
Like brown people.
Okay, yeah, so there you go. That is your feeling. It doesn't really substantiate itself within my worldview. I'm sorry, I like facts over feelings. If we want to talk about the harm these people do, then we can talk about like very specific policy positions, or we can talk about broader moralistic arguments about the extent to which we should sort of engage in internationalism and engage in altruism towards other people. But your argument that like, oh, well, we're American, we should care about America. I'm sorry, these hold no water to me.
Okay.
Of course, it wouldn't to a leftist.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Your attempt to shame me for caring about people, like as a concept, has fallen flat, my friend. But hey, don't worry. Listen, as the scary brown people come in, statistically speaking, your economic engagement is going to rise. So hey, you know, at least you're benefiting from the thing you hate.
Okay. Actually, let's do this. Oh, Aaron's not here. God damn it. Okay, never mind. Next question is gonna be from very gross of you. Can you account for the moral judgments you've made outside of the Christian world?
Account for the moral judgments I've made outside the Christian world? What does that mean? What does it mean to account for it? What moral judgments?
I don't know if he's doing it here. I guess the idea is that you can't make any moral claim unless you're a Christian, because you know all morality would come from God.
Okay, I mean, this is like a centuries-old dumbfuck talking point. So I derive my morals from an epistemic analysis of my axiomatic values, right? So so for instance, like even if a god exists, that does not necessarily mean that that god's prescriptions are what is just and what is moral. Even if a god did exist, even if you could prove the Christian god exists, you would then have to apply a moral philosophy to sort of ascribe moral worth to what that god says, called divine command theory. Whatever God says, that's what's moral, blah, blah, blah. You know who didn't have divine command theory? The fucking Greeks. Yeah, the Greeks thought their pantheon was full of fucking lunatics and drunkards. They did not by any means derive virtue from the behavior of their gods. So even if you presuppose the existence of a god, epistemic philosophy still comes into play, though a lot of people aren't willing to touch that because it requires them being a little more critical of the things they believe in. For me, I want people to be happy, healthy. I want people to be prosperous, contented, educated. I want good things to happen for human beings and for all sentient life, for the most part. And those are sort of my axiomatic values. I can't justify why I want that. I can't justify why I want people to be happy, but I stand by it. And from that point, I sort of make moral judgments that I think serve those axiomatic values. A god need not play any role in it.
Okay. Next question is going to be from Spellbinder. Spellbinder, you are on mute.
Hello, does this work?
Howdy.
First. Yep. All right, so let me just bring back my question I wrote down. It's about late stage capitalism and its like effect on the world, and we're seeing now that a lot of American corporations are very big now, and this is how it's going to affect us in the future, and that they're talking about these big IT companies that have a lot of money and assets, and they're talking about how they're going to build up artificial intelligence, and it's going to replace workforce. Now, I wonder, as a college grad student, I've been talking to this with my professor, and I'm just going to bring it up, the question up here, so we can have a little discussion about this. And how Vaush, just want to see what's your opinion on all of this.
I mean, I'll admit this is pretty far out of my wheelhouse. There's a lot of nuance to sort of industrialization, automation, and AI development that's beyond my sort of academic field. I will say, however, it is telling that under a sort of capitalist economic structure, that an increase in efficiency could lead to a greater level of scarcity amongst workers. That's an interesting little magic trick there that can't really take place in a just economic system. A lot of people like to sort of, because, you know, many people don't subscribe to the labor theory of value, but a lot of people sort of distance the material wealth of a person from the productivity in a nation. At the end of the day, the reason why I have a car, have a wardrobe full of clothes, have a kitchen full of food, the reason why I'm able to enjoy the comforts of middle-class life isn't because of some trick of the economy. It's because there is an amount of labor, an amount of resource acquisition and transformation and distribution that goes into the products that I benefit from. Likewise, labor that sort of props up the services that I enjoy. And a AI-driven system, in a system with a greater level of automation, that productivity goes nowhere. That efficiency goes nowhere. It increases, if anything. All we need is a system which is capable of ethically redistributing that increased efficiency amidst the population that needs it. As for how to achieve this, that's complicated, but it should be a goal of, well, everyone. Automation should lead to a general improvement of the conditions of living for most people.
But what do we do when, let's say, Amazon is a very big competition with a lot of local stores in the US? But what's going to happen when they reach out to other continents and they're wiping out other malls and shopping malls and other centers in, let's say, Europe, some parts of Asia, South America, Africa?
Well, there's still efficiency, is there not? I mean, goods are still being produced efficiently. That wealth still exists, at least nominally, in America because it's being run through American corporations. Why isn't it being redistributed to the workers? It's only through the
Okay.
the labor of workers that efficiency is able to exist at all.
All right. Thank you, Vaush.
It is a super complicated question that would take like a deep dive into economics for me. So.
But I just thought it would be a vital moment now to bring up. I just have one more question, Dobby. Can I?
Yeah, hit me up.
Dobby.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Is it true that you can get moderator if you send nude pics to you, Dobby?
I wish that were true. I feel like I'd get.
But I saw the logs.
I feel like I'd get way more like.
This is how I became a mod. Don't lie.
But someone posted logs
actually,
of it.
it's true that I did see Viv's dick before he became a mod. Unfortunately. Next question is going to be from. Next question is going to be from. Let's go with. Kaliyuga. You're unmuted. Go for it.
Yes, hello, hi. Check. Do you hear me clearly?
You're quiet, but I can turn you up at my end.
Quiet. All right. Maybe a little bit louder. Is this better?
That is better.
Great. So first, there's so much to unpack. So I don't know if we'll be able to do it. I'd like to discuss more of the deep stuff with you away from AIM. But for now, I have a few minor questions. And I would like to open with a statement from Thomas Sowell, which is, the first rule of economics is that there is not enough resources to maximize everyone's potential. First rule of politics is to ignore first rule of economics. And now, my question is actually more on nuclear proliferation and what, I don't know if you have thought about it, and how nuclear proliferation is actually maximizing pragmatic rather than dogmatic meta ideologies, which will actually negate a lot of conflicts. And example of this was the Cold War, which had more benefit than negative outcomes along its way. So what do you think? Is it a good thing for you? Have you thought about it? Is it a negative thing?
This is a really tough one for me. So obviously nobody wants to see the Earth ended in a nuclear holocaust, except for Posadists, of which there seem to be some on my server. Most of us don't want that. There is a good argument to be made, of course, that nuclear proliferation actually increases the amount of peace in this world because it makes so destructive the outcomes of invading other countries that it is better than to refrain from doing so. I don't know how much that's worth it if like all it takes is one bad day, one bad incident to literally like end a large portion of the planet. That's a really, really tough one. In an ideal society, I would want to see it such that different nation states cooperate with one another and refrain from invading one another, not because of threat of nuclear proliferation or mutually assured destruction, but rather because of a shared economic destiny, that the economic consequences of invading another country with which you collaborate are so devastating that there would be no benefit. There is literally like no way you could win out in a war with a country that you have deep economic ties to, which is why, like, for example, we would never go to war right now with like fucking Germany or Japan or England, not just because we're allies, of course, though one could argue our allyship is actually a product of our economic sort of cohabitation, but rather because the economic cohabitation is in and of itself a form of mutually assured destruction, one which does not have the potential to end the world. Until that point is reached, though, and who knows
This
if
is
we're
actually
ever...
going to be very soon, though, Valsh. You know what hypersonic glide vehicles are, right?
Could you repeat that?
You know what a hypersonic glide vehicle is, right? It's a new form of hypersonic weapon which is able to carry a nuclear weapon at hypersonic speeds, which can go past most conventional missile defense systems, which will break the sort of fragile balance of mutually assured destruction.
No, it won't. Excuse me, it won't, because dead men switch.
No, because that's based upon the principle of you devolving the control systems of nuclear systems to commanders. Whereas right now, the ultimate sort of like bulk of it rests
dead man
with...
switch is fully automated system.
1 second, guys. This is between Callie and Vash, right?
Yeah, I have no idea what super weapons are on the cusp of being developed. That is, however, why my goal would be shared economic prosperity, because there are ways, at least hypothetically, to circumvent the how do you call it, the deterrence of a nuclear threat. But there are not ways to circumvent the prospect, like, hey, we get a ton of imports from this country. If we blow them up, like, we're fucked too, you know? There's not really a way to circumvent that with technology.
I understand what your view is, but I think it's more of a understanding of, or at least availability of information. And from my research, and I do research on this, is that the economic prosperity you're talking about is not technically possible under the scarcity scenario between countries, and it's not a zero-sum game actually, but it's still not possible because there are different forces, let's say, at play that will prevent it from happening. And so one of the only transitionary ways, as which I see as structures from being dogmatic to moving to pragmatism, that is removal of religious structures, removal of autocracies, removal of fascistic structure or any highly centralized systems. That is being dogmatic. They will be moving to pragmatism, not by force of economics, because it is technically impossible under the scarcity scenario. But because of that, under scarcity scenario, we have few limited options, including the nuclear proliferation. And to your previous point about the US losing its influence in the world, you're very right, and it is because exactly of nuclear proliferation. Think of an example with North Korea, which was like 2 years ago, when the fellas in US got really giddy up and sent a lot of military and were offering THAAD systems to the South Korea, and they were escalating to scare off Kimi from going in with the plan, which when they still went through, everything stopped. And it stops because, again, self-assured destruction, dead man switch, which is automated systems which do not require people to enact them. All right, that's why it's dead man switch, for the guy who talked about supersonic stuff. Now, the same thing is happening with Iran currently, because Iran so far technically does not have that. And what happens is that nukes are technically the great equalizer, because they say, we're a small country, but you cannot push your values or your ideals or your even economic projects for the benefits of your elites or whoever is in charge of your country onto our nation. And it is something, of course, those who wish to have highly centralized structure cannot have. And so everybody who is against nuclear proliferation by other nations will use any means necessary for United Nations or all other forms of enforcing of these things on those nations, so they don't have the nukes. In effect, that's what's happening because now China, Korea, they are technically responsible for the region politically and influence it. It's not US anymore, all right? And Europe, if Iran gets it, it loses Middle East. US will not be able to push onto Iran. US will not be able to push onto Iraq because of Iran. And it will have a hard time with Syria again because of Iran. Things will not be nice for Israel. Things will not be nice for Saudi Arabia, who for some reason is the greatest ally of the United States. In my understanding, is that nuclear proliferation is the most effective way of negating such. And yes, USA will decay, and including mostly due to economic reasons of their debt economy. So I'm sorry, this is doom and gloom, but US, you will have new monetary currency, monetary system in like next 10 years, and probably that's going to be crypto, if nothing else. So. It's going to be a little, worrisome for those in the United States. But yes, the hegemony, will change. The NATO will be reformed. I can guarantee you 100%. I'm either extremely wrong or extremely right. So I don't mind 100%. If anybody else has questions, I can stop, or because I have a lot. So I can ask more, or we can move on, and then I ask some more later. But generally,
I don't know how much of that was a question. So we've touched on like 18 subjects that are sort of outside my my personal range of familiarity.
Let's touch on something that you're familiar with, if it's okay.
All right.
Let's touch on anarchism. Tell me, I got that you're not the anarchist because you say there should be intermediary stage between the anarchism and the between the communism and the capitalism. My understanding is. Have you ever looked at these ideologies through the lens of scarcity, post-scarcity scenario?
You've talked a lot about scarcity as a sort of economic concept.
Yes.
There's no post-scarcity is a euphemism. There's no real thing as post-scarcity. Like a lot of people, when they think of post-scarcity, is an economic system by which there is no meaningful difficulty in acquiring the means and labor necessary to produce everything society needs. But I think should think generally the needs of society kind of scale with the productivity of that society. I don't really think that scarcity, chat, Jesus. I don't really think that framing anarchism as something which is achievable specifically in a post-scarcity framework, I don't think that this is a very realistic way of sort of framing economic discourse. I would rather seek to argue that with the productivity we see in society today, it is entirely possible that everyone in this country could live a lifestyle of comfort and luxury approximately comparable to my own. That system, that not post-scarcity, but rather that general predominance of resource availability, that could be framed within any economic system. We just need to find the economic system that best, lends itself towards the distributive systems for ensuring that it meaningfully benefits the population.
I understand what you're saying, but what I meant actually is that I would disagree with you, because post-scarcity is not an ideology or a system. Post-scarcity is the social environmental scenario under which different models, social economic systems can be developed. And in this, what I'm saying is that certain systems are more predisposed or designed to exist in different types of scenarios. And to my knowledge, given my knowledge, I don't want to push here, appeal to experiences, but what I'm saying is that there are conditions under which post-scarcity is a reachable scenario, and it is possible. The thing is that the nature of human behavior prevents it from happening. Not as we want it to. It is a part of our psychological conditioning, which evolved through the instinctual biology of survival. All right, and it frames our thinking in a way of competition rather than cooperation. And to annihilate that will maximize the possibility of actually reaching post-scarcity. And I'm talking post-scarcity, Star Trek style post-scarcity. I'm talking Gene Roddenberry. Sorry. So the thing here is that when you're saying anarchist, I'm like, I understand you, because I myself ideologically. Hard to say. I would claim I'm anarchist libertarian, but something of that sort, I would say. The issue is that certain such systems will not be reachable through socialism, because socialism is diametrically opposed to anarchism or communism to that degree. Because in my understanding, it is first of all, it's not only try to be highly centralized, or at least attempts to centralize through the government. And then the idea is that people can naturally move from that to highly decentralized structure, because anarchy and communism are hyper individualistic or hyper decentralized systems. So there, the idea that you can make people just switch in a matter of like decades from centralized or highly centralizable structures or hierarchies, to highly decentralized hierarchies, I wouldn't say that is correct way. And I would say that instead of socialism, better structures would be examples of minarchism. That would be better ways to approach anarchy communism, through minarchism rather through socialism, because minarchism envisions the basis of anarchism and communism, rather than by decentralizing the structures which already inhabit, which are more decentralized than during feudal times, during the mercantilism, and so on and so forth. Do you see what I'm saying?
I mean, now nobody can accuse me of not reading theory. Like, okay, I mean, these aren't questions. These are long diatribes on theory. I would need to read more. I don't know.
Just hit it. You can do it.
All right. Okay. Listen. All right. Listen. How about this? Okay. Listen. For you. Okay. I'm going to counterbalance all of that by reading theory, and I'm going to read it out loud to my chat one day, okay? And we're going to deep dive. We're going to re-listen to this, and we're going to deep dive, okay? And we're going to critique this. We're going to read some. We're going to read some Engels. We're going to read some Lenin. We're going to read some Kropotkin. We're gonna get in. We're going to deep dive into this subject, okay? But until then, I don't know if we can talk about this.
I can do 5 hours, no problem. Call me anytime.
All right. Hey, listen. I love you. You know that, right?
I feel uncomfortable.
I love you.
Yeah, I feel uncomfortable.
Hey, see, wait, who was talking shit about gender norms later? Here I am saying I love the brotherhood of man, and folks feel uncomfortable about that because they're deuterinos. All right, what are we up? What are we on?
Okay, next question from Katz. What's your stance on reducing gun violence, both high-profile gun violence and that in more dangerous areas that often use handgun? Handgun?
I think we mostly addressed this earlier, but to put it simply, ending the drug war, which would end the material conditions that lead to a whole bunch of fucking inner city fucking gang black gun on gun violence or whatever. Cut that shit out. Demasculinize guns as a concept. The way in which we advertise guns and treat them narratively in this country is pretty fucking weird. It's pretty fucking weird how many people treat guns like a fucking dick extension tool. That's some weird shit. Okay, we should probably cut that out. We can cut that out. We should invest in mental health, probably if for no other reason than because it would probably reduce the number of suicides with guns, which I do count as gun deaths. The only thing that I don't want is some kind of government registry on who can and can't have a firearm, because as a leftist and somebody who occasionally advocates for revolutionary action, I would probably be put on that list. So that would be my argument there. It is a problem, but we need to be a little bit, I think, more clever with how we solve it than just banning the spooky assault rifles and putting the stupid fucking bump stock guard shit on the AR-15s, you know?
Okay. Next question is going to be from, let's go with Max Hedberg. Earlier you responded to a pro-life question with the answer that the unborn are not entitled to the rights that you apparently have. My question is, what exactly is it that entitles you to the right of life, but not the unborn?
I would say that personhood, which is what I correlate to right to life. Like that is what makes you worthy of like not killing. Personhood is an emergent property of engagement with one's environment. So having a brain, having a heart, that's not enough. It's about living in the world and engaging with it to the extent that you become an actor. And this is like a highly esoteric philosophical definition that goes a little bit beyond my ability to like fully flesh it out, but the properties of emergent characteristics and how they relate to personhood and consciousness as concepts, I think are pretty well like studied in philosophy. Where you draw the line ultimately is up to you. I would make the argument that there are probably children post-birth who could be aborted ethically, like children that are 3 months old or whatever, but you never really know when somebody has developed the emergent characteristics of consciousness and personhood. And for that reason, setting a hard line, an arbitrary line, but a hard one, at birth probably seems like a decent idea.
Okay. Next question from Sir Vagabond NYC. Sir Vagabond, I'm gonna unmute as soon as I find you. There you are. Okay, go. Any second now.
I'm a giddy with excitement.
Weird. I don't think he's.
Ripperino.
Okay. Next question. Let's go with actual communism.
I think the server lagged a little. That's why I couldn't speak.
What was that? Oh, there he is.
Yeah,
Vagabond, you're
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about that. Maybe my connection is strong. So I was just saying it's been a great conversation so far. Thank you for your time, Vaush. I was going to ask if you would think the Earth is flat or spherical.
Hey, listen, I don't know if there are any globe heads in chat. All I'm saying is I'm critical of state power then, and I'm critical of state power now. Rise up.
Boom.
Don't be sheep.
Thank you, brother.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah,
Next question.
I'm validated.
Next question. It's from Big Dick of Chad Nation. Do you support Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, and
Fidel Castro?
Fidel Castro?
These people are very, very like different in tiers of the extent to which they meaningfully crafted socialism. Stalin, fuck no. Strong man who seized power within the USSR political apparatus, was not supported by Lenin as a successor. A brutal reign of terror committed by him. Sure, he had some successes. Whatever. I don't think that's I think that's more an adulation of the USSR model than it was of Stalin himself. Mao Zedong. I want to read more on Maoist literature, but from what I can see, the original project of Maoism was well-intentioned, but once I'm not a cultural revolution boy at all, like, period. I hate that. The idea of, like, destroying bourgeois art is so, like, disgusting to, because at that point you're just destroying art that doesn't support the state apparatus. Like, he had some good ideas about landlords, though. But Fidel Castro, I think actually was a pretty good proponent. Like, Cuba today, I think, has some pretty good things going for it. There are a lot of like very sort of strong positive statements that I could make about Castro's reign. He was by no means perfect. He was still a strong man, but I would put him in a much kinder light than I would Mao, and an infinitely kinder light than I would Stalin.
Okay. Next question is from where is this person? Oh, Zircon. What are your thoughts of the Hong Kong protests?
I know I get like super fucking canceled over this, but like, I don't like the People's Republic of China. It's not socialist. It's a capitalist state. It's like not even state capitalist. It's some bizarre hybrid of like state authoritarianism and also of capitalism. It's not a fucking socialist state. Anyone who says the People's Republic of China is a socialist state in this day and age is fucking lying to themselves. You fucking LARPer tankies. Get the fuck out of here. It's like so dumb shit. The Hong Kong protesters are maybe working in line with like fucking like the interests of America or whatever, but I don't think that like a lot of people define like their interests in foreign movements on whether or not like America supports it. That's so fucking stupid. It's entirely conceivable that the Hong Kong protests could legitimately be like a whole bunch of like workers and middle class people rising up against what they see to be the tyranny of looming Chinese, oppression, which I think is a very, very valid thing for them to be afraid of. Like, Jesus fucking Christ, it's China. But then, of course, like the tankies will step back and they'll go like, well, actually, if you take a look at this one photo of them seizing a courthouse and flying the Union Jack, you can find that they are actually calling for Western imperialism to take Hong Kong over. Actually, all 2.8 million protesters are actually bourgeois. It's a bourgeois protest. And actually, the cops that are beating and killing them, those are actually the people's cops. So it's not bad to support those cops. And actually, fuck that shit. There are going to be goods and bads about the Hong Kong protests, but any like fucking massive uprising against authoritarianism has my support easily.
Okay. Next question is from Chig. I don't know how to say that. This is this is just want to come back to the bit on UBI because you say you're pro it when implemented properly. But I have a few problems with UBI. First of all, how do you see it implemented within a current capitalist system, or more as a part of another economic system? What are the risks of UBI? Just being another kind of patch to capitalism, stabilizing it, thereby prolonging its life, instead of letting it crumble to its internal contradiction. Secondly, a big problem with UBI seems to be that providers of price inelastic products and services could just raise their price. Like rent, landowners could raise their prices, thereby transforming the state into a mechanism which transfers money from the tax workers to the lychee cunt.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I'm critical of any implementation of of UBI under capitalism, because you're completely right, or whoever asked the question is completely right. 100%. UBI is like an excellent band-aid to capitalism, and you're right. UBI would probably correspond with a rise in prices, especially with how Yang proposes it, with a fucking VAT tax being the way we would fund it, which is like a fucking regressive tax. And it's one of the reasons why I generally support baseline stipends provided by the state rather than a flat amount of money. Getting a certain amount of bread, milk, apples, and gasoline per week or month, that's consistent. You're never going to need more apples or bread. Like inflation isn't going to change how much bread you need in a day, or how much gasoline you need in a day. Those things are pretty consistent, or at least they're consistent like per number of people in household. Whereas if you give people $1,000 a month, you have no idea what kind of market forces are going to affect that. You have no idea if Congress is going to be able to pass legislation to keep that in line with cost. You have no idea if the way taxes are levied aren't going to lead to an increase in commodity prices that essentially neutralizes the effectiveness of it in the first place. There are like so many ways in which attaching that stipend to like a monetary value makes it infinitely more difficult to control for like pricing changes and economic upheaval. And because UBI can be used as a band-aid to capitalism, I agree. I would want to see it implemented in socialism. There are some like bad doomsday scenarios that could take place if UBI was successfully implemented under capitalism, like some weird cyberpunk, like nobody makes enough money at their jobs to live. Everyone has to rely on the state, but because they rely on the state, the party that they rely on isn't willing to meaningfully challenge the economic superstructure. Like, yeah, I don't know. That's some spooky shit.
Okay. Next question is from Katz. On abortion, when do you think sentience begins on average? Can it happen prenatally?
I don't think that it can happen Well, sentience isn't really a definable term. Well, the ability to like recognize one environment, that probably does take place in the womb, right? Like haven't we done studies on this? Like the brain bits that correspond with an ability to recognize your environment, those things develop when you're in the womb. So there probably is a period of time during which you're a little fucking fetus inside the womb and you're like, oh, it sure is warm and wet in here, like that kind of thing. But in terms of personhood or consciousness, there's no way to like materially definitively define when, by my definition, you would reach that point. But I would say that as a precondition, it could not take place before birth because engagement with one's environment requires one be outside the womb. Unless the only thing that could sway me on this position would be if there was some way to determine that fetuses in the womb were thinking like, oh, that's mom, I can't wait to get out and like meet her, I can't wait to hug. But I don't think that level of social engagement is really present in infants of that age. There's something that facilitates it, there's a proxy to those desires, but I don't think that that degree of social engagement is possible for a pre-birth infant, in my opinion.
Okay. Next, Cass would like to talk actually. Cass, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
So
Go.
when does that mean that you think? So does that mean that you think abortion should be allowed till it's like full term, or like what is that for you? Like when should abortions be illegal, if at all?
So this is difficult because we're sort of interceding policy with moral prescriptions. That's difficult. In regards to when an abortion should be allowed, I have heard decent arguments for like the second term cutoff. I don't know if they're very convincing, at least not from the framework with which I approach this. I would argue that it would be ethical from my moral prescription to abort up until the point of birth. Though I would also say that if the kid is on the cusp of being born, it would probably be more ethical to wait it out and just, throw him up for adoption. I would probably make that judgment. But this is like weird, like threshold utilitarianism, where you'd argue like, well, the emergent properties of consciousness develop at this point, but the potential that you're still harming something that is technically alive while not outweighing the agency of the person who carries that body in them might outweigh it if they're like 2 days away from being born. There's like that's a really complicated set of prescriptions. I would probably like second or third term abortions would probably be fine for me.
Thank you. Interesting.
You know, I gotta say, I think I'm holding up pretty well for someone who was dead sick when I woke up.
Actually, you're doing a really good job.
Thank you.
I was worried the fascists were gonna overwhelm me.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. They make, they try.
They try. Okay, Katz, you want to follow up on that, Katz? You done?
Oh no, I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Next one is from Sean Chai. Sean Chai. You're unmuted. Go for it.
Okay, so I'm only on the cusp of the discussion that just happened just there. So, about the abortion debate, would you say that we're just limited by the constraints of technology? What if you were to say that there is within reason with the first term, but when it comes to like second, first trimester, when it gets to the point of second trimester close to that, there are exceptions where a baby can still survive. If you get me, it's like there's it's like it is possible. So what if there was a stage where medical science was to get to that point where what if you were to almost, I don't know, take this potential fetus, remove it, incubate it somewhere, and then continue with growing? I don't know. But it could be like this. I'm going to the philosophical sort of questioning things where what if sort of scenario, like we're just constrained to the limitations of technology when it comes to medical science, but if there wasn't such a case, then would you compromise a bit more, I suppose?
I don't think that survivability. I don't think survivability is really relevant to personhood as a concept. I think it's possible to have personhood but be utterly dependent on the systems around you, and to not have personhood but to nonetheless be able to live freely and autonomously. In terms of like prescriptions as to what could be done with baby or fetuses that could survive on their own but may not have developed personhood, just as a matter of caution, because I recognize there's always a degree of ambiguity when it comes to assessing the emergence of characteristics like consciousness, I would always argue in the defensive. I would always say, if you have the opportunity to preserve the life of a fetus, even if it hasn't developed personhood, if that is something you are willing to do, if it is something that does not cause you harm or great suffering, I would advocate you do so. If for no other reason than because you cannot be 100% sure the extent to which it's engaged, its personhood has been secured. You just don't know. So I would agree with you in that as technology advances, hopefully we can refine that line and treat more ethically cases where we're on sort of the ambiguous cusp of personhood, but beyond that would be like a really deep dive question of mixing philosophy with like scientific prescriptions. It'd be pretty, it'd be a good meme.
Yeah. Well, that's why I saw that's why it gets, this is my subjective point of view. This is why I sort of bring up and say that like I am within reason of like abortions when it's like first trimester. When it gets to the point where it gets to the second trimester where there are instances of premature births where babies are let's just say healthy and whatnot, and maybe they're like they have some sort of birth defects where they're maybe the respiratory and whatnot, but it's like in those instances, it still has the likelihood of survival. Yeah, I know maybe it's not as justifiable, but I don't know. I find it like that. That's where it has that sort of justifiable instances of where it's limited. It's like within the EU as well. About how you could sort of have like an abortion, how it's done and implemented. Like there are like countries in the EU where it's more liberal, like, and but when it gets to the point of like second trimester where you have perform abortions, it's like there's a level of scrutiny, and it's for those reasons, I think. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that would be like, I'm always in favor of the refinement of technology as a tool to help us make philosophical judgments. But beyond that, the personhood argument doesn't really like relate at all to the survivability of a fetus.
Yeah. So like the first trimester, but when it gets to second trimester, you're a little bit, and when it comes to medical, so you're a bit open to compromise to some degree, would you say?
Well, I would argue none of them have personhood, but if somebody was willing to make the sacrifice to bring them to term even if they didn't want to, or to remove them if they were survivable on their own, even without their personhood, that they probably should, only because the concept of personhood, being that it's emergent, is ambiguous.
Okay. All right. That's understandable. Okay, thank you.
I love you, buddy.
Okay. Let's see. Next question is going to be from what is this? The Alaskan Hungarian. Is there an essential quality of a just or unjust hierarchy, or a culmination of qualities? And if so, what are those qualities?
I mean, the only difference really between a just or unjust hierarchy is whether or not it benefits people or not. A just hierarchy is one which justifies itself, not necessarily that it is justice, that it's that we prescribe it has some moral validity, but rather because it ultimately increases the general happiness and utility of the world. For example, like adults being hierarchically on top of children, that's probably a good thing. I don't really know if I want 3-year-olds having the same level of like political and social autonomy as an adult. I'm okay with that hierarchy, you know? And the reason I'm okay with it isn't because I think that there's some moral obligation for kids to listen to their superiors, but rather because I think we get utility, we get benefit out of, you know, the existence of that hierarchy. I would say the same of hierarchies of competence in a workplace, a union, a syndicate. If there's one person there who knows quite a bit more than everyone else, who tries harder, who is, well, better at their job, I'm perfectly fine with there being some system of incentivization that allows them some greater degree of autonomy when it comes to making decisions in that workplace. That's valid. I mean, that's meritocracy right there. They work hard, and because they work hard, they are now in a position that they can do more good if they have slightly more autonomy. But there are unjust hierarchies. That's most of them. And these hierarchies are ones which I believe can be pruned, removed without without harming society, or in fact benefiting society when that is done. The making people unequal is in and of itself, to me, a wrong that must be justified quite strongly if it is to be maintained socially. Amazing.
Okay. Next question is going to be from oh my god. Okay, let's what is your stance on drawn or animated pornography of children in which no children or minors are included whatsoever? I think they're talking about lolly.
Yeah.
Lolicon.
I've talked about this a lot on my stream. Though it does get me some heat, I am not comfortable at all with the state being able to criminalize a person or like censor art because they ascribe like moralistic tendencies to it. I'm not comfortable. I will never give the state that kind of power. That's like a really fucking bad slippery slope, you know? For one, being able to be like condemned by the state for a drawing is in and of itself pretty fucking scary. But imagine if you're like drawing younger characters, like late high school or early college, that are like legal, but the state is like, hey, that's pretty fucking suspicious. What are you doing there? And you have to like defend your art. That sounds ridiculous, but keep in mind that in Australia they literally made it illegal to do like pornography, live IRL pornography with women with A cups, because they thought that like small-breasted women were too close looking to children. Like that's fucking wild to me. That's like moral policing right there. Get that boomer shit out of my fucking face. So, like, yeah, I'm not comfortable with the state having that power. However, socially, I think we should make some pretty strong social prescriptions to keep people from raping children.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, next
That was a
question.
good take.
Thank you, Kath. Next question is from Selganor. Well, there are two. The first is, would you describe yourself as a left-wing minarchist or a left-wing anarchist?
Anarchist. Isn't minarchist like some dumbass shit? I literally, I've never even Googled the definition of minarchism. All I know is that when my boys talking about minarchism, they have the frowny faces. So minarchy is fascism. Minarchy. Okay, yeah, I don't fucking know. Probably not minarchism, but I'd need to read before I can really say.
Okay, next question from the same person is, how do you propose we tackle the source of all reactionary, that's religion?
I don't think religion is the source of all reactionary politics. Wasn't religion outlawed in the USSR, but Stalin still sent homosexuals to the gulags? I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't like religion, but but I don't think that's the source of all reactionary ideology. In terms of getting rid of religion, like, it's kind of already happening. It seems like decently educated people who live in decent, like, material wealth trend towards atheism or fuck me, I'm sick. My brain is dying. What is being indifferent to the concept or not believing you cannot have knowledge on agnosticism? Thank you, Chan. Yeah, I think the majority, like, of polls that I've seen indicate that we're trending towards that, at least in the developed world. So it seems like just being educated, having a rational worldview, lends itself towards a religious thought. But there are probably other ways. Like, I'm pretty, like, strictly anti mysticism, and I promote that. So hopefully people acting in that way will not only deal with religion, but also deal with the many ways in which superstitious thought affects our lives in the day-to-day. People believing in concepts like fortune or divine will or tarot cards or premonition or psychic abilities, that kind of stuff, you know? I don't like that.
Okay. And we've been going on for like almost 3 hours. I know you're sick, so if at any point you want to wrap it up, just let me know. And we can always do this again whenever you want to.
I would say let's probably give it a solid 20 more minutes. We can round it off at 6 p.m. EST, and then I guess I'm probably just going to go hack into a toilet and go back to sleep.
Okay. Next question is from Esoteric Paternalism. You previously said race is somewhat a modern concept that has been a product of the transatlantic slave trade. What is your opinion of the medieval racial categories that match up with with modern post-16th century racial categorizations that was explained through the generations of Noah and Christian and Jewish societies?
They don't. I see we have an alt-hype fan here. No. So the concept of race was not invented with the transatlantic slave trade. Our modern conceptualization of race, racial hierarchies, and the racial divides was a product largely of the transatlantic slave trade and the social attitudes that were developed to facilitate it. While race did exist prior to the transatlantic slave trade as a concept, obviously no one has ever, well, I'm sure someone's denied it. I've never denied it. Their conceptualizations of race were very different. For one, inherent differences in IQ, or that, well, not just IQ, but in intelligence, this was not in any way, shape, or form framed the way we do it today. People thought like the Nordic peoples, the peoples up north were full of spirit and blood, but were clumsy and slow-witted, and the Southern Europeans were intelligent and deceitful. They thought that people in the Middle East were brown because they had been toasted by the sun, and that they had very little blood in them because it had been evaporated out of them. They believed they were, please, if anyone's interested in this, I'm not a historian, but I've read some accounts. Please, God, go on and read some shit on pre-modern conceptualizations of race, they had some wild, like, D&D level shit. They had some wacky shit. Now, occasionally, did some of those preconceptions line up with modern race lines? Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't take a fucking genius to realize that an African on average and a European on average look pretty different. It makes sense that people who are thinking sort of intuitively are going to arrive at the conclusion that there are differences between these groups of people. But the conceptualization of like this being like a Darwinistic, like a bottleneck sort of differentiation, and that races are different subspecies, this is a wildly modern concept, and very ahistorical. That'd actually be a fun subject of discussion for a stream sometime, to go over like different historical accounts and all the dumb fuck things they would say about race, you know? In fact, I think even Alt Hype in his video said like, yeah, so the people in the ancient civilizations thought differently race, but like whatever, why should we hear what they think? We're getting closer to the truth now, or something like that. So even he recognized that the pre-modern conceptualization of race was very different than what we have today.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for that answer. Next question is going to be from, let's go with Yesef. How do we fight unjust power structures and socially enforced double binds?
Socially enforced what?
Double binds? I don't know what that is.
Double bonds?
Double binds. BINDS.
I don't know what they mean by double binds, but the way in which you would fight against unjust did they say unjust hierarchies, or?
Yeah. Oh, he posted a definition. A double bind is a dilemma in which communication in the dilemma in communication in which an individual or group receives two or more conflicting messages, with one negating the other.
Like doublethink, basically, or being given conflicting information on a this is like a really big question.
Yeah.
How do we? Can you repeat the question? What was the thing that we're trying to?
Where was this? How do we fight unjust power structures and socially enforced double binds?
Socially enforced double binds. So would that be like us being told that Mexicans are like lazy and a detriment to the economy, but also that they'll steal our jobs? Like two pieces of contradictory information that fill into a social hierarchy. Something like that. I don't know. That's like really vague. I'd need to be given like specific, like a specific topic or a specific. Oh wait, a situation in which a person is confronted with two irreconcilable demands or a choice between two irreconcilable course of action. That's a different definition than that which was provided by the person who asked the question. I would need a more specific question. I'm terribly sorry. I can't answer this.
Okay. Next question is from Cane Toad. Cane Toad, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to just ask it. Otherwise, I'll just read it for you. Okay, he wants me to read them. First question. In relation to the AOC question, what's your thoughts on this? And he's posted a Wikipedia article. See French petition against age of consent. Oh no.
Oh, when they said AOC, I thought you meant like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I was thinking like, oh,
yeah, I did too, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think they're talking about age of consent laws. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, okay. So I have 2 points on this. For one, I've read enough on history to know that age of consent as a concept has more to do with preserving like chivalrous attitudes towards the purity and virginity of women than it does with preventing adults from harming children. However, we've kind of co-opted that rule set for a modern use, for a more, harm reductive sort of system now. So I am historically aware enough to recognize that the age of consent at 18 is not like this divine, flawless, concept that can't be impugned or challenged or questioned in any way without like being pro raping children. However, holy shit, do we rape a lot of kids? Oh my fucking god, do we rape a lot of children? It's fucking wild how much child sexual abuse there is. And not just child sexual abuse, but like older people like creeping on younger people in like a really weird power dynamic-y kind of way. Literally like I'm sorry, hold on. Fucking kill me. Sorry.
It's okay.
Literally anyone here who went to high school, unless you were a loser, beta, unless you're a fucking beta who didn't have any friends, you personally know of one or more girls that were like 15 or 14 but getting creeped on by like college age dudes, or like you had a crush on a girl or whatever, and then she'd be like, oh teehee, I have a boyfriend, and it's some fucking like dude from like this is like really common. This isn't just me rambling about my anecdotal experiences. Like I'm pretty sure everyone's experienced this shit happens all the time. So there are two separate questions here. Should the age of consent be changed? I'm open to arguments that it could be lowered or raised. I don't think there's anything divine about 18 as an age. But the more important question to me is the age of consent actually right now protecting young people? And my answer to that would be no. No, I really don't think so. Kids are getting victimized like fucking crazy. And young people abused by older folks. So that would be my response. The age of consent line is a proxy for the actual question of how do we protect young people from exploitative or abusive relationships. And that, I think, is the more important one.
Okay. Next question is from Syntax. Syntax, I'll go ahead and unmute you in 5 seconds. So fine, there you are. Okay, you're in.
Okay, so I have two questions. If death is inevitable, and this is like a philosophical question, if death is inevitable, what do you believe is the main motive behind people's constant greed towards making something out of their lives? Also, since like I'm an Alan Watts follower, do you believe that we're all one in the same? Like we're technically scientifically made out of the same building blocks for like basically everything else is made out of in the universe. So these are two questions.
In regards to finding meaning in life before death, honestly, I just think that's a physiological drive that we have because it aids us in some of the techniques we developed for survival in the earlier days of our sort of specieshood. Like finding purpose in life, being like deriving purpose from one's successes or whatever. These things correlate, I think, positively with a willingness to cooperate with others and do good things in your life. And those things correlate positively with success in like a survival sense. So I think that we're like on a vestigial sense, and I like this. I like trying like struggling. I like the absurdism to struggle to find meaning in an objectively meaningless life. I like that. I think there's beauty and poetry in sort of our futile drive. But I would say it is ultimately that. It is a drive. It is biological. In regards to us all being one and the same, actually, I would go the opposite route. I think that there's something deeply lonely and alienating about being alive. The knowledge that no one will ever be able to understand you, like truly understand you, you know. No one will ever be able to peer into your thoughts and understand the totality of your feelings. You can only vaguely express them through language. You can use the tools around you to convey your feelings, but you can never really truly let other people know what you think. This is I think this is one of the greatest like intrinsic modes of suffering that we experience, and I would go so far as to say, while in like this grand astrological sense we may all be the same in a materialistic sense, in an individual sort of like in our internal worlds, there is nothing less like a human than another human being, and again I do think there is beauty in that as well.
Okay. Next question. Well, thank you for that, Syntax. But next question is from Very Gross of You. That wasn't in response to what you were doing. That's the guy's name. Very Gross of You. Go for it. DJ, are you there? Oh my God, this guy's gonna drive me insane.
Amazing.
Okay. Next question again. It's going to be from. Let's go with D. D, you're unmuted. Go for it. No? No D?
Amazing.
My God. She said don't unmute. I'm on acid right now. Okay.
Nice.
This is why we need Sharia, okay? That's going to drive me insane. Okay, next question is going to be for Kamarov. Socialism increases the standards of living in the GDP, which is a fact. But why do most socialist governments tend to dictatorial?
I believe I addressed that earlier. The tendency towards authoritarianism within socialist states is usually a reaction to or a defense against the perceived threat of foreign imperialism, the threat that capitalist or imperialist nations are going to storm on in and fuck with you. And the more authoritarian a nation is, the better you are able to defend yourself against that threat. That's just a fucking fact of life, you know. Authoritarianism, the ability to mobilize the power of a state quickly, the ability to suppress like democratic dissent, these things correlate pretty strongly with being able to deal with foreign threats. So yeah, that would be like, I think it's pretty much that simple. It's just as global threats to socialism fall to the wayside, the likelihood of a democratic socialist revolution increases. In my opinion, I hope, fingers crossed.
Okay, very gross of his back. He said he had to pee. I hope your penis is strained. Please speak.
Okay, so my main question to you is, how did you come to the conclusions that I would say the total view that you've established of the world and what you think should follow is necessarily moral?
Oh, I can't. Oh, that would be like a horribly judgmental, not judgmental, sorry. That would be like a horribly presumptuous thing of me to assume. I make arguments in favor of my moral system, and I have axiomatic values like people's happiness and well-being that I advocate for and I extrapolate policy positions from. But for me to say that my morals are objectively correct, I would never make that argument. Now, axiomatic values are by definition unjustified. Like my belief that I want people to be happy, that's not like I can't ground that. I can't like make that empirically truthful. I can just argue its worth. And I think most people want to see folks happy, or at least most people think they do. So I would never argue my morals are objectively correct, blah, blah, blah. I would rather argue in favor of them and try to remediate differences with people who have different values or different interpretations of the same axiomatic values. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, there are some differences that cannot be resolved with conversation. For example, if there was a person who for some reason developed a series of axiomatic values where they believed their purpose in life was to maximize human suffering, like I don't think there would be reasoning with this person. I think it would just be better probably to kill them. Like a person who dedicates their entire life not to the betterment of humanity but rather to its destruction, not accidentally but deliberately. This is what they want. Like their axiomatic values may be different than mine, but they're every bit as unjustified as mine are. So at that point, a conversation would fail. You would just have to, you know, hope that they that someone stops them.
So morally, you don't consider yourself any better than, let's say, a Nazi?
Well, I do from my moral system. I think that my axiomatic values are every bit as unjustified as that of a Nazi's. However, I would argue that many Nazis make incoherent prescriptions from their axiomatic values. A lot of people who are Nazis still claim to value things like happiness and like human well-being, which is laughable. Those axiomatic values don't like follow through to Nazism in any way, shape, or form. So I would argue with them on that point. I would say, hey, you value this, this, and this, do you not? I do too. Let's parse it out. But if there was a Nazi whose only values were like fatherhood and blood and soil and allegiance to the state and loyalty and like all these things that I don't give a fuck about on their own, if that was their only sort of moral prescription, then I wouldn't really have a way to communicate with them. At that point, discourse would have to take place like from the barrel of a gun.
Okay. All right, that's all I want to know.
Okay. We got about 3 minutes left. So why don't we just kind of wrap it up? Do you have anything you'd like to say to the people? Like anything you want to like some message, some pearl of wisdom you want to leave?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I've seen AMA discussion the entire time we've been talking. Is this like a predominantly fashy server or?
I would say that we
honest
lean
with me.
like no, I'll be totally honest with you. We lean like I would say like right libertarianish. We do have a lot of fascists. We also have a lot of communists. We allow basically everything but Nazis. So we've got people from all over the spectrum. We've got like flat earthers and crazy Christian fundamentalists and Muslim fundamentalists and literally everybody.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
it's kind of the point of the server
we're
to get people from all over the planet.
Most Americans are proto-fascists anyway, so what are you gonna do? Okay. So there's a tendency when discussions like this come about to engage in very bad faith with the people you disagree with. I've experienced it to some extent here, but mostly just my broader conversations with fascists. I would say this, and I am appealing sort of uselessly to the morals of fascists, which experience has taught me this is not worth my time. But what I like people, and I want to make the world a better place. And I find very often that when I try to do this, when I argue in favor of certain things, or I try to change people's minds, my obstacle is not so much people having different opinions or people having different interpretations of the same facts, but rather people who prescriptively are not willing to engage in good faith with me. People who are more interested in like ad homs or like dismissing me because it's the man bun comes up most often, actually, which is very weird for its inconsequentiality. I don't know how anyone could be confident in their position but think you should dismiss a person's arguments because of how they wear their hair, but that's kind of how it works with fascists. Any sign of degeneracy or effeminate behavior, I guess, would be the case with a man bun, and you get to sort of categorically write off their perspective. Same with the you're fat, blah, blah. Don't get me wrong. I love insulting people. I take them on the cheek. I'm fine with insulting people, but I never insult people in a way that keeps me from considering their perspectives. I never do that. I really don't. And it's one of the things that's led to me, sort of growing politically. My willingness to simultaneously despise somebody or something, but also to think like, okay, well, let's not take the easy way out now. What can I do about this? I would like to see more people do that, because there are probably a lot of fascists listening right now who probably think ill of me, and fine. But if you're going to think ill of me, do it with reals. Don't do it with feels, okay? Do it with right here in your feels chest, okay? This is a good place for you, all right? But do it up here. Because every time I talk with a fucking fasci, I tell you, the first 15 minutes is dedicated to what seems to be a sensible discussion on foreign policy, and the rest of it is like screeching about degeneracy or conspiracy theories. Very sad. Anyway, just hope we can all have better discussions in the future.
Yeah, I think just in my experience, right? Like, I think people on both sides, I guess if there are sides, have like some kind of like a caricature, right, of the other side made up in their head. So when they actually meet a person that has those opinions, they try to argue with this monster that they've created, and they tend to ignore the person in front of them.
I do get it.
Really
I get it from all over the place too. It's not just fascists. I shouldn't be like reductive. There are a lot of tankies who just call me a rad lib, like a liberal or a neoliberal or some shit, which is dumb as fuck. There are a lot of like super sensitive SJW breadtube types who think I'm like a reactionary class reduction. Listen, people really like dismissing the opinions of others, but that's okay. I love the conversations.
Okay, and we're very happy to have you on. Again, if you had fun, you want to come back on, you're more than welcome to whenever you want. We got plenty of people here that want to talk to. I don't know if you've seen the question channel, but like it's still being flooded with questions. So yeah, anytime you want to come on, just let us know.
Yeah, and if any of you are interested in asking me questions directly, I mean, I have open DMs. I can't respond to everyone. That's not practical. But I stream pretty often. I have people on pretty often. I debate pretty often. So if there's any person you're willing to get through to, I'm probabilistically, you're probably more likely to get it through to me than you would most streamers.
And for those who are on the stream, if you do want to find us, just look up Politics Discord server. We're the largest, most active political server on Discord, so far as I know. Yeah, Vash, we're very glad to have you on. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, have yourself a good day, okay?
Thanks, you too. Hope you feel better.
Thank you. All right, farewell. Oh, boy. I'm the chillest anarchist I've ever met. I mean, I didn't become an anarchist so I could be like preachy. I just want the world to be better. Fuck me. Oh boy. Ah boy. Illness did nothing to dilute that. You guys really think so? I feel a little off my game. Why'd you avoid asking him if he washed his hands after he peed? Because, dude, that server, or at least the people who were active right then, were like crazy Fash. Holy shit. Oh, God. The discussion was like, the AMA discussion was like 100% like fucking, yeah, fat piece shit. Haha, fucking fat commie. Wow. Like that kind of shit, you know? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?